Hello, and welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. Your support means everything to us. We'd love to know, which geographical location are you joining from today? At home? On the go? Share with us below. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Foundation. Leroy Fulton stood at the kitchen counter, nursing his third cup of coffee. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the suburban home he'd worked 14 years to afford. Through the glass, he could see the perfectly manicured lawn, the tire swing he'd hung for Cody, and the garden beds where Melissa helped her mother plant tulips every spring. The house was quiet now. Vanessa had taken the kids to school, leaving behind only the scent of her expensive perfume and the remains of a tense breakfast. Their marriage of 12 years had been cooling for months, but lately, it felt like living with a stranger. "Another late night at the office?" she'd asked last night, her voice carrying an edge he couldn't quite place. "The Hendrickson project isn't going to finish itself," Leroy had replied, loosening his tie. As a senior architectural engineer, his expertise came with demanding hours. "You know how it is, Van." She'd only nodded, her attention fixed on her phone. "The kids missed you at dinner." Again. It wasn't an accusation, not exactly, but it stung all the same. Leroy had been working overtime for months to ensure the promotion that would secure their financial future. The irony wasn't lost on him that his efforts to provide for his family kept him away from them. Now, standing in his empty kitchen, Leroy scrolled through the photos on his phone. Cody's last baseball game, Melissa's dance recital, family vacations to the lake house. When had the distance between him and Vanessa become so vast? When had her smile toward him started looking forced? His phone buzzed with a text from his colleague, Dwayne. "Meeting pushed to 11. Boss wants to discuss your promotion." Leroy smiled. At least something was going right. The promotion would mean better hours, more flexibility, and finally, the chance to be present for his family. As he drove to work, Leroy reflected on the changes he'd noticed in Vanessa. Her sudden interest in fitness, new wardrobe, and hours spent at the neighborhood book club. She'd been distant, distracted. He'd attributed it to her frustration with his work schedule, but something nagged at him. Something wasn't right. "You're overthinking," he muttered to himself as he pulled into the parking garage. Fix the promotion, fix the hours, fix the marriage. At the office, Dwayne met him with a firm handshake. "Today's the day, man. Regional Director Fulton has a nice ring to it." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Leroy said, but he couldn't help smiling. This promotion meant everything. The meeting went perfectly. By noon, Leroy was officially the new Regional Director of Engineering. He immediately called Vanessa to share the news. "That's wonderful," she said, her voice oddly flat. "We should talk when you get home tonight." The ominous tone made his stomach drop. "Everything okay?" "We'll talk tonight," she repeated before hanging up. Throughout the afternoon, as colleagues congratulated him, Leroy's mind kept wandering to Vanessa's response. He left work early, stopping to pick up champagne and flowers. Whatever was wrong, they would fix it. With his new position, he could finally be the husband and father they deserved. When he arrived home, Vanessa was waiting in the living room, hands clasped in her lap. The children were nowhere to be seen. "Where are the kids?" Leroy asked, setting down his gifts. "At my sister's." Vanessa's face was composed, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "We need to talk, Leroy." He sat across from her, the champagne forgotten. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she began, her voice steady. "We've been growing apart. You're always working, and the kids, they need stability." Leroy leaned forward. "That's why I've been working so hard for this promotion. Things will be different now. Better hours, more time with you and the kids." "It's too late for that," Vanessa interrupted. We need space. I think you should move out for a while. Temporarily." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Move out? Van, whatever problems we're having, we can work through them together. I just got promoted." "The kids need stability," Vanessa said, her voice rising. "They need routine and consistency. You're coming and going at all hours. The tension between us, it's affecting them. I'm asking you to move out temporarily, just until we figure things out." Leroy stared at his wife, searching for the woman he'd married 12 years ago. He thought about Cody and Melissa, how his absence had affected them. Maybe she was right. Maybe some space would help them all. How long is temporarily? He asked quietly. A few weeks. A month at most, she replied, looking relieved. We'll go to counseling, figure out what's best for the kids. Against his better judgment, Leroy agreed. For the kids. He would do anything for them. That night, he packed a suitcase and checked into the residence in Nir's office. As he sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the generic landscape painting on the wall, Leroy couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. Something Vanessa wasn't telling him. Chapter 2. The Revelation. A week passed with minimal contact from Vanessa. Leroy called the kids daily, visited twice for awkward dinners where Vanessa remained distant, and threw himself into his new position at work. The separation was supposed to give them clarity, but Leroy felt only a growing unease. Have you considered that there might be someone else? Dwayne asked over lunch at their usual spot near the office. Leroy set down his sandwich. Vanessa wouldn't do that. Dwayne raised an eyebrow. New clothes, sudden interest in fitness, mysterious book club meetings, asking you to move out temporarily. Come on, man. We've been together since college, Leroy protested, but doubt had taken root. She wouldn't throw that away. For your sake, I hope you're right, Dwayne said. But maybe do a drive-by, just to ease your mind. The suggestion lingered as Leroy returned to work. That evening, instead of going back to his hotel room, he found himself driving through his neighborhood, toward the home he'd been asked to leave. As he approached, he slowed down. The evening was warm, and several neighbors were out in their yards. His neighbor, Boyd Hughes, was mowing the lawn. Boyd had moved in next door about a year ago after his divorce. He was a physical therapist who worked at the local medical center, friendly enough, though Leroy had always found something off-putting about him. Leroy was about to drive past when the front door of his house opened. Vanessa emerged carrying a glass of what looked like lemonade. She crossed the lawn to where Boyd was finishing up with the mower. Leroy watched, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as she handed Boyd the drink. He could justify that, a neighborly gesture, nothing more. What he couldn't justify was what happened next. Vanessa leaned in and kissed Boyd, not a friendly peck, but the kind of kiss reserved for lovers. Boyd's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her close. Leroy felt physically ill. He pulled over, unable to drive, his vision blurring with anger and betrayal. As he sat there, trying to process what he'd seen, the front door opened again. Cody and Melissa ran out, racing toward Boyd with obvious excitement. "Daddy," they shouted in unison, throwing themselves at him. Boyd caught them, laughing, swinging Melissa up while ruffling Cody's hair. The tableau was perfectly domestic, a happy family enjoying the evening together. Except it was Boyd in Leroy's place, with Leroy's wife and Leroy's children. The shot gave way to a cold rage unlike anything Leroy had ever experienced. Everything clicked into place. The distance, the book club meetings, Vanessa's insistence that he move out. It hadn't been about space or stability for the kids. It had been about clearing the way for Boyd to take his place. Leroy started the car and drove away before they noticed him. He needed time to think, to plan, because one thing was certain, this betrayal would not stand. That night, he called a real estate agent and instructed her to list the house for sale immediately. The property was in his name. His inheritance had paid for the down payment. Legally, he had every right to sell it. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Fulton?" the agent asked. Typically, in a marital separation, "I'm sure," Leroy said, his voice calm despite the storm inside him. "I want the for sale sign up tomorrow." Next, he called Omar Hendricks, the best divorce attorney in the city. He explained the situation, including the affair and his children calling another man daddy. "Document everything," Omar advised, "and don't confront them yet. We need to build our case first." Leroy hung up, his mind racing with questions. How long had this been going on? Did everyone know except him? How could Vanessa and Boyd have manipulated his children into calling another man daddy in just 1 week? The answers would come. For now, Leroy focused on one thing. They would pay for this betrayal. All of them. Chapter 3. The Declaration of War. The for sale sign went up the next day, just as Leroy had instructed. He parked down the street, watching from a distance as the real estate agent hammered it into the front lawn. Within an hour, his phone exploded with texts, and calls from Vanessa. He ignored them all, savoring her panic. Finally, he answered. "What the hell are you doing?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill. "You can't sell our house." "Actually, I can," Leroy replied calmly. "The deed is in my name. My inheritance, my house. The children." "Don't you dare talk to me about the children," Leroy cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. "I saw them yesterday, Vanessa. I saw them call Boy Daddy." A beat of silence followed. "Leroy, I can explain." "Save it for the divorce proceedings," he said. "I've already retained an attorney. Expect to be served tomorrow." "Please, let's talk about this like adults," Vanessa pleaded, her tone shifting to conciliatory. "For the sake of the kids who call another man daddy." Leroy laughed bitterly. "Tell me, how long has this been going on? Weeks? Months?" "The entire time I was working overtime for that promotion to give you and the kids a better life." Another pause. "It's complicated." "It's really not," Leroy said. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. And you turned my children against me. That's not fair." "The kids are confused. They seem pretty clear on who their daddy is now," Leroy retorted. "I wonder what the judge will think about that." "You're being irrational," Vanessa said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please just come home. We can work this out." "I'm being perfectly rational," Leroy replied. "And that house isn't my home anymore. Not with you and Boy playing house there." "What do you want?" Vanessa asked finally. Leroy's voice hardened. "I want you to understand exactly what you've done. I want you and Boy to feel what it's like to have everything taken away. And I'm just getting started." He hung up, a grim satisfaction replacing the hollow ache in his chest. The betrayal still hurt. It would probably always hurt, but now he had purpose. They thought they could steal his life, his family. They were about to learn how wrong they were. That evening, Leroy met with Omar to formalize their strategy. The attorney listened as Leroy laid out everything he knew about the affair. "We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery," Omar said, making notes. "And we'll push for full custody." Full custody? Leroy hadn't considered that. "They call him Daddy now, which actually works in our favor," Omar explained. "It shows parental alienation. They've encouraged the children to replace you. That's considered emotional abuse in family court." The thought of taking the children from Vanessa gave Leroy pause. Despite everything, they were still his kids. But then he remembered their excited voices calling out to Boyd, and his resolve hardened. "Do it," he said. "I want everything, the house, the kids, child support from her." Omar nodded. "We'll need evidence of the affair. Text messages, emails, witness statements, anything you can get." "Leave that to me," Leroy said. Over the next few days, Leroy orchestrated his first moves. He froze the joint bank accounts, transferred his direct deposit to a new account, and hired a private investigator to document the affair. He also reached out to parents of his children's friends and teachers at their school, establishing that he had always been an involved father despite his work schedule. When Vanessa was served with divorce papers, she showed up at his hotel, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to do this," she begged. "We can still fix things." Leroy regarded her coolly. "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice." "The kids are devastated about the house," she said. "They don't understand why you're doing this." "I'm sure Boy can console them," Leroy replied. "Since he's daddy now." Vanessa flinched. That was a mistake. They were confused. "Save the lies for someone who still believes them." Leroy cut her off. "You made your bed with Boyd. Now you both get to lie in it." As Vanessa left, Leroy felt a moment of doubt. Was he going too far? Then he remembered the kiss, the children's excited voices calling another man daddy, and the weeks, maybe months, of deception. No, he wasn't going too far. In fact, he was just getting started. The house sale and divorce were only the opening moves. The real revenge was still to come. Because Leroy Fulton never forgot a betrayal. And he never, ever forgave one. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. 2 weeks after filing for divorce, Leroy moved into a sleek downtown apartment. The space was modern and impersonal, the opposite of the warm family home he'd lost, but it suited his current state of mind. He'd arranged his home office to function as a war room, with a whiteboard mapping out his revenge strategy. "You sure you want to go this route?" Dwayne asked, eyeing the detailed plans on the board. Divorce is one thing, but this is scorched earth. They scorched the earth first, Leroy replied, uncapping a marker to add another note. I'm just making sure they reap what they've sown. The private investigator, Marla Winters, had delivered her first report, and it was even worse than Leroy had imagined. Boyd and Vanessa's affair had been going on for 8 months, nearly the entire time Boyd had lived next door. They'd met at the gym, where Boyd worked part-time as a personal trainer, and their workout sessions had quickly moved to his house when Leroy was at work. Even more disturbing, text messages recovered from the family cloud account showed that Vanessa had been deliberately alienating the children from Leroy, telling them that Daddy is too busy for us and that Boyd cares about us more. She'd been laying the groundwork for replacing him long before asking him to move out. Your wife's been planning this exit for months, Marla had explained. The temporary separation was just to test the waters, see how the kids adjusted to Boyd before making it permanent. The revelation had crystallized Leroy's resolve. This wasn't just an affair born of opportunity or neglect. This was calculated, premeditated betrayal. Now, Leroy studied the information he'd gathered. Boyd Hughes had his own skeletons, a messy divorce, gambling debts at a local casino, and a history of dating married women. His physical therapy practice was struggling financially, which explained his interest in Vanessa, whose family had money. Vanessa's vulnerabilities were equally clear. Her social standing in the community mattered enormously to her, as did her image as a perfect mother. She'd been secretly funneling money from their joint account to Boyd for months, ostensibly for training sessions, but actually helping him cover his gambling losses. The custody hearing is next week, Dwayne reminded him. You ready for that? Leroy nodded grimly. More than ready. That evening, Leroy met with Omar to review their custody strategy. The attorney seemed impressed by the evidence Leroy had gathered. Parental alienation, financial infidelity, exposing the children to her affair partner. The judge won't look kindly on any of this, Omar said. But be prepared. She'll come at you hard about your work hours. I've addressed that, Leroy said. My new position allows flexible hours and remote work. I've already arranged a modified schedule to accommodate school pickups and activities. Omar nodded approvingly. Good. And what about this? He tapped a folder labeled Phase 2. That's personal, Leroy said. Nothing illegal, but not relevant to the custody case. Omar gave him a knowing look. Just be careful. Revenge may feel good in the moment, but it can backfire. Leroy's expression hardened. This isn't about feeling good. It's about justice. Later that night, Leroy received a text from an unknown number. It was Boyd. We need to talk. Man to man. Leroy considered ignoring it, but then saw an opportunity. Your place. Tomorrow. 8 p.m. The response came immediately. Thank you. Leroy smiled grimly. Boyd had no idea what was coming. The next evening, Leroy arrived at Boyd's house precisely at 8. The neighbor's house was smaller than his own, a bachelor pad with minimal furnishings and a prominent large-screen TV. Boyd opened the door, looking uncomfortable. Thanks for coming. Can I get you a drink? Let's skip the pleasantries, Leroy said, remaining standing. What do you want? Boyd sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Look, I know you're upset. Upset, Leroy repeated with a hollow laugh. Is that what you think this is? I know it's more than that. Boyd backpedaled. But this situation has gotten out of control. The kids are suffering. Don't you dare talk about my children. Leroy cut him off, his voice deadly quiet. You don't have the right. Boyd held up his hands. I care about them too. That's why I wanted to talk. This war you're waging, selling the house, freezing accounts, the custody battle, it's hurting everyone. Again, why should I care? You and Vanessa didn't care about hurting me when you started sleeping together. You didn't care about hurting the kids when you encouraged them to call you daddy. Boyd had the grace to look ashamed. That was wrong. I admit that. But it only happened a couple of times, and Vanessa corrected them. After 8 months of sneaking around, Leroy challenged. After deliberately turning them against me, after asking me to move out so you could move in, save your lies for someone stupid enough to believe them. Boyd's expression changed, growing harder. What do you want, Leroy? Money? I'll pay you back for the training sessions. Leroy laughed. You think this is about money? This is about the fact that you and Vanessa tried to steal my life. My home. My children. Nobody stole anything. Boyd protested. Marriages end. People move on. They do, Leroy agreed, his voice softening dangerously. And actions have consequences. Something in Leroy's tone made Boyd pale. Are you threatening me? Not at all, Leroy replied with a cold smile. I'm just letting you know that I'm fully aware of everything. The gambling debts, the pattern of targeting married women, the money Vanessa's been funneling to you. All of it. Boyd's face went from pale to ashen. How did you? Doesn't matter, Leroy cut him off. What matters is that you and Vanessa made a critical mistake. You thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and accept your betrayal. He stepped closer. I'm going to take back everything that's mine, and then I'm going to make sure you both lose everything else. This is insane, Boyd stammered. You need help, man. Therapy or something. What I need, Leroy said evenly, is for you to understand exactly who you're dealing with. This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy call to let you know that your comfortable little plan is about to implode. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Boyd, the next time you try to play daddy with my kids, remember this conversation. As Leroy walked back to his car, he felt a cold satisfaction. The fear in Boyd's eyes had been real. Good. Let him worry. Let him wonder what was coming next. Because phase 2 of Leroy's plan was about to begin. Chapter 5. Laying the groundwork. The custody hearing arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. Leroy sat beside Omar in the sterile courtroom, watching as Vanessa entered with her attorney, Patricia Conway, a shark-like woman known for aggressive tactics in divorce cases. Vanessa looked exhausted, her designer outfit unable to hide the toll the past weeks had taken. Boyd was notably absent, a tactical decision, Leroy assumed, to distance himself from the proceedings. Judge Harriet Sandoval, a no-nonsense veteran of family court, reviewed the preliminary documents with a frown. Before we begin, I want to be clear that my only concern is the well-being of the minor children. I don't care about your personal grievances with each other. The hearing proceeded. Vanessa's attorney presented her as a devoted stay-at-home mother whose entire life revolved around the children. She painted Leroy as a workaholic who had emotionally abandoned his family. Mrs. Fulton has been the primary caregiver since the children were born, Conway argued. Mr. Fulton regularly worked 60-hour weeks, missing school events and family dinners. The children have stability with their mother. When it was Omar's turn, he approached the matter differently. Your Honor, we agree that Mrs. Fulton has been physically present. What we contest is the quality of her care and the deliberate campaign to alienate the children from their father. He presented the evidence, text messages where Vanessa told the children that Daddy doesn't want to be with us anymore, records showing that she had scheduled important school events during Leroy's planned visitation times, and testimony from Melissa's teacher that Vanessa had instructed the school to remove Leroy from the emergency contact list weeks before the separation. Then came the bombshell, photos from the private investigator showing Boyd and Vanessa together, dating back 8 months, along with bank records of the money transfers. Mrs. Fulton has been conducting an affair with a neighbor for 8 months, Omar stated. She has exposed the children to this relationship, encouraged them to call this man daddy, and used family funds to support his gambling addiction. Vanessa gasped, her composure cracking. That's not true. Boyd doesn't have a gambling problem. Judge Sandoval's gaze sharpened. Mrs. Fulton, you will speak only when addressed by the court. Conway tried to recover, arguing that Leroy's evidence was obtained unethically, but the damage was done. The judge had seen the bank records, the texts, the timeline of deception. When Leroy took the stand, he spoke with calm sincerity about his love for his children and his new work arrangements that would allow him to be present for them. I worked those long hours to provide for my family, he explained. The promotion I recently received was the goal I'd been working toward. Better pay, better hours, the ability to be more present. I never imagined my wife was using my absence to replace me in my children's lives. By the end of the hearing, Judge Sandoval looked troubled. I'll render my decision within the week, she announced. In the meantime, the current visitation schedule will remain in effect. Outside the courtroom, Conway approached Omar and Leroy with a proposal. My client is willing to discuss a more equitable custody arrangement and property division if Mr. Fulton will reconsider selling the house. Leroy met Vanessa's pleading gaze across the hallway. Tell your client that ship has sailed, he replied. We'll wait for the judge's ruling. Later that day, Leroy received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. Trish Winters, Vanessa's best friend since college. He almost didn't answer when the concierge called up, but curiosity won out. Trish looked uncomfortable standing in his minimalist living room. I probably shouldn't be here, she began, declining his offer of a drink. But I thought you should know some things. About Vanessa and Boyd? Leroy asked, gesturing for her to sit. Trish nodded, perching on the edge of the sofa. It's worse than you think. Boyd approached Vanessa, not the other way around. He had this whole system. Find unhappy wives at the gym, become their trainer, their confidant, then their lover. Leroy's jaw tightened. And you knew about this? Not at first, Trish admitted. Vanessa only told me they were having problems with you. By the time I realized what was really happening, they were already... She trailed off. Sleeping together, Leroy finished flatly. Trish nodded miserably. I told her to end it, to come clean with you. But Boyd had convinced her that you didn't really care about her or the kids anymore. And the children calling him daddy, that was his idea too, Trish said, looking genuinely disgusted. He told Vanessa it would help them adjust to the new family structure. I thought it was sick, but Vanessa was completely under his spell. Leroy processed this information, adding it to his mental file. Why are you telling me this now? Trish sighed. Because after the hearing today, I saw who Boyd really is. When the judge seemed to be leaning your way, he told Vanessa that maybe they should cut their losses, meaning her and the kids. He's already seeing someone else, Leroy, some divorcee from his gym with a hefty settlement. The revelation should have brought satisfaction, but Leroy only felt a deep, cold anger. Not just at Boyd now, but at Vanessa for being so easily manipulated for putting their children in this position. Does Vanessa know you're here? He asked. Trish shook her head. She wouldn't listen anyway. Boyd has convinced her that you're the villain, that you're being cruel and vindictive. I am being vindictive, Leroy acknowledged, but only because they tried to take everything from me. After Trish left, Leroy updated his revenge board with the new information. Boyd's pattern of targeting vulnerable married women, his quick pivot to a new prospect when things got difficult. These were weaknesses Leroy could exploit. Phase 2 would require precision timing. The custody decision, the house sale, and his next moves all needed to align perfectly. Leroy picked up his phone and made a call to Marla, the PI. I need everything you can get on Boyd's new target, he instructed. And I mean everything. The woman's voice was clipped, professional. I'd advise against direct confrontation or harassment, Mr. Fulton. Nothing like that, Leroy assured her. Just information. Knowledge is power, after all. 3 days later, Judge Sandoval issued her custody ruling. Joint legal custody with Leroy as the primary physical custodian. Vanessa would have the children on weekends and Wednesday evenings. The ruling cited concerns about Vanessa's judgment in involving the children in her relationship with Boyd and the documented attempts at parental alienation. Vanessa called immediately, sobbing. How could you do this? Take my children from me. I didn't, Leroy replied calmly. Your actions did. You chose Boyd over your family. I made a mistake, she cried. I know that now. Boyd isn't who I thought he was. Let me guess, he's already moved on to his next target? Leroy couldn't keep the bitter satisfaction from his voice. Vanessa's silence was answer enough. The house closes next week, Leroy continued. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. Where are we supposed to go? Vanessa asked, desperation evident in her voice. That's not my problem anymore, Leroy said. Maybe Boyd will take you in. Oh wait, he's busy with his new girlfriend. As he hung up, Leroy felt no joy in Vanessa's distress. Only the grim determination to complete what he'd started. Boyd had moved on to his next victim, leaving Vanessa to face the consequences alone. But Leroy wasn't finished with either of them. The next phase would ensure that Boyd could never do to another family what he'd done to Leroy's. And Vanessa would understand exactly what her betrayal had cost. The foundations were laid. Now it was time to build the trap that would destroy them both. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The closing on the house went smoothly. Leroy used his portion of the proceeds to purchase a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a good school district, ensuring the children would have stability. The rest he set aside in a trust for Cody and Melissa's education, accessible only when they turned 18. Vanessa had moved in with her sister temporarily, her relationship with Boyd effectively over. According to Trish, who had become an unexpected ally, Boyd had completely ghosted Vanessa once the custody ruling came down, moving on to his new target, Renee Simmons, a recently divorced pharmaceutical sales rep with a substantial settlement. She's devastated, Trish reported during one of their coffee meetings. Not just about Boyd, but about losing primary custody. She finally sees how she was manipulated, but it's too late. Leroy felt a flicker of pity, quickly extinguished by the memory of his children calling another man daddy. She made her choices, he said simply. The first weekend the children came to stay at his new house was tense. Cody, at 10, was old enough to understand some of what had happened and regarded Leroy with wary resentment. 8-year-old Melissa was confused and tearful, asking repeatedly when they could go home. "This is your home now," Leroy explained patiently, showing them their rooms, decorated according to their preferences. "At least part of the time, you'll still see Mom on weekends." "And Boyd?" Cody asked, a challenge in his young voice. Leroy crouched to his son's level. "Boyd won't be around anymore. He and your mom aren't together now." Melissa's face crumpled. "But he said he was going to be our new daddy." The pain was sharp, but Leroy kept his expression gentle. "I know things have been confusing, but I'm your dad. I've always been your dad, and I always will be. No one can change that." Over dinner, he avoided discussing Vanessa or the divorce, instead focusing on their interests and school activities. Slowly, the tension eased. By bedtime, Melissa had curled up beside him on the couch, and Cody had begrudgingly shown him his latest video game progress. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Rebuilding his relationship with his children would take time, but Leroy was committed to the process. They were innocent victims in this mess, manipulated by the adults they trusted. The following week, Leroy implemented the next phase of his plan. With Marla's help, he compiled a comprehensive dossier on Boyd's predatory pattern, the married women he'd targeted at the gym, the financial support he'd extracted from them, and his swift abandonment when things got complicated. He arranged a meeting with the owner of the health club where Boyd worked as a trainer. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Leroy assured the nervous manager, Carlton Mills. "I just think you should be aware of what's happening on your premises." He presented the evidence, statements from 3 women Boyd had pursued, bank records showing the money Vanessa had given him, and documentation of his gambling debts. "He's using your facility to target vulnerable women," Leroy explained. "Specifically, married women with access to financial resources. Once he bleeds them dry or things get complicated, he moves on to the next target." Carlton reviewed the material with growing alarm. "I had no idea. We've had a few complaints about him being too friendly with female clients, but nothing like this." "His latest target is Renee Simmons," Leroy added. "She trains with him Tuesday and Thursday mornings." "I'll address this immediately," Carlton promised. "This behavior violates every ethical standard we have." Boyd was fired the next day. According to Trish, who heard it from Vanessa, he was escorted out mid-session, his belongings from the employee locker room delivered to him in the parking lot. The timing aligned perfectly with Leroy's next move. Through Omar, he had quietly contacted the casino where Boyd had accumulated his gambling debts. The manager was very interested to learn about Boyd's sudden unemployment and his pattern of extracting money from vulnerable women. "We take problem gambling very seriously," the casino manager assured Omar. "We'll ensure Mr. Hughes is added to our exclusion list. And of course, we'll be pursuing collection of his outstanding debts." With Boyd's primary income gone and his access to the casino revoked, Leroy knew his financial situation would quickly become desperate. The gambling debts weren't huge, about $30,000. But without income and with his reputation in the physical therapy community now tarnished, Boyd would struggle to make payments. The next part required careful timing. Leroy had learned from Marla that Boyd had been falsifying some of his physical therapy credentials. He hadn't completed the continuing education requirements for his license renewal, but had submitted documentation claiming he had. An anonymous tip to the state licensing board would ensure that Boyd's private practice, already struggling, would come under scrutiny. But Leroy held that card for now, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, he focused on rebuilding his life with his children. The transition was challenging, but each week brought improvement. Cody gradually dropped his defensive attitude, and Melissa stopped asking about Boyd. They established new routines, new traditions. Vanessa, however, was struggling. Without Boyd or her children full-time, she seemed lost. Her sister was pressuring her to find her own place, but with no income of her own and the divorce settlement still pending, her options were limited. She's talking about moving back to her parents' place in Phoenix, Trish reported. She can't afford to stay here, especially with child support payments. The news gave Leroy pause. If Vanessa moved out of state, it would complicate the custody arrangement and potentially hurt the children. Tell her I'll meet with her, he said finally. Just her. No lawyers. They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Vanessa looked thinner, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. The confident, polished woman he'd married was gone, replaced by someone who seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice subdued. "I wasn't sure you would." Leroy nodded curtly. "Trish mentioned you're considering moving to Phoenix." "I don't have much choice," Vanessa replied. "I can't afford to stay here. My parents offered me their guest house until I can get back on my feet. And the kids." Vanessa looked down at her coffee. "I was hoping we could revise the custody arrangement. Summer with me, school year with you, or longer visits during school breaks." Leroy considered his next words carefully. Despite everything, he didn't want to punish his children by depriving them of their mother. But he also wasn't willing to disrupt the stability they were finally establishing. "I'll have Omar draw up an amendment to the custody agreement," he said finally. "You keep your weekends when you're in town, plus extended time during school breaks. But the children stay with me during the school year." Relief flooded Vanessa's face. "Thank you. That's more than fair given—" She trailed off. "Given that you try to replace me with Boyd?" Leroy finished, his voice cooler now. "Given that you taught our children to call another man daddy?" "Yes, it is more than fair." Vanessa flinched. "I've apologized for that. I was wrong. Terrible, unforgivably wrong. Boyd manipulated me, but I let him. I betrayed you and the kids, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "Save the apologies," Leroy cut her off. "They don't change anything. What more do you want from me?" Vanessa asked, desperation edging into her voice. "You've taken the house, the kids, my reputation in the community. I'm moving halfway across the country. Isn't that enough?" Leroy regarded her dispassionately. "You chose Boyd over our family. You lied, cheated, manipulated our children, and when it all fell apart, you expected sympathy." He leaned forward. "Let me be perfectly clear. I will never forgive what you did. Ever. The only reason I'm being civil is for Cody and Melissa's sake." Tears spilled down Vanessa's cheeks. "I know. I don't deserve forgiveness. But please don't punish the kids because of my mistakes." "I'm not punishing anyone," Leroy replied. "I'm protecting what's mine." He stood, leaving his coffee untouched. "Omar will contact your attorney about the amended custody agreement." As he walked away, Leroy felt a familiar cold satisfaction. Vanessa was broken, her perfect life in shambles. Boyd was unemployed, blacklisted, and facing financial ruin. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but there was still one final phase to execute. The piece of the puzzle that would ensure neither of them could ever recover from their betrayal. It was time to spring the trap. Chapter 7. The First Domino Falls. 3 months after Vanessa moved to Phoenix, Leroy received an unexpected call from Renee Simmons, Boyd's latest target. He had been monitoring the situation through Marla, but hadn't anticipated direct contact. "Mr. Fulton? You don't know me, but I think we have a mutual problem," Renee began, her voice tense. "Boyd Hughes." Leroy's interest was immediately piqued. "What can I do for you, Miss Simmons?" "I understand you were married to Vanessa Fulton, and that Boyd was involved with her. That's correct, Leroy confirmed, careful to keep his tone neutral. Though we're divorced now. I've recently discovered some disturbing information about Boyd, Renee continued. Let's just say I'm not the only woman he's been seeing. And there are financial irregularities I can't ignore. I'm familiar with his methods, Leroy said. I've ended things with him, but now he's becoming threatening, Renee explained. Calling at all hours, showing up at my workplace. He seems desperate. This was an unexpected development, Boyd turning aggressive when his usual tactics failed. Leroy considered the implications. Have you contacted the police? I filed a report, but they said they can't do much without evidence of an actual threat. Renee sounded frustrated. Your ex-wife's friend, Trish, suggested I call you. She said you might have information that could help. Leroy smiled slightly. Trish had become an unexpected ally in all this. I may, yes. Would you be willing to meet? They arranged to meet at a downtown restaurant the following evening. Renee was an attractive woman in her early 40s, poised and professional in her pharmaceutical sales role. She brought a folder of her own documentation. He convinced me to invest in his private physical therapy practice, she explained, showing Leroy the paperwork. $50,000, supposedly secured against the business assets. Then I discovered he's not even licensed properly. Leroy nodded. His continuing education credits were falsified. The state board is already investigating. Renee looked surprised. How do you know that? I've been tracking Boyd's activities for some time, Leroy admitted. After what he did to my family, I wanted to ensure he couldn't do it to anyone else. Understanding dawned in Renee's eyes. The anonymous complaint to the licensing board, the casino ban, the gym firing. That was all you. Leroy neither confirmed nor denied, simply giving her a measured look. Boyd has a pattern of targeting vulnerable women, extracting money, then moving on. He nearly destroyed my family. I'm merely ensuring there are consequences. I'm not usually vindictive, Renee said slowly. But he's taken money I can't afford to lose. Money from my divorce settlement meant for my daughter's college fund. And now these threats. She pushed her phone across the table, showing a series of increasingly desperate and angry texts for Boyd. Leroy reviewed them carefully. The progression was clear. Initial pleas, then manipulation, finally thinly veiled threats about making her regret cutting him off. This is actionable, Leroy noted, especially combined with showing up at your workplace. You need a restraining order. The police said there weren't specific enough threats, Renee repeated. The police don't always get it right, Leroy replied. I know someone who can help. A specialist in protective orders for women dealing with harassment. He took out his phone and called Omar, explaining the situation briefly. After the call, he turned back to Renee. Omar's associate can see you tomorrow morning. She has an excellent success rate with these cases. Thank you, Renee said, genuine gratitude in her voice. But what about my investment? Boyd's already spent most of it, for what I can tell. That's where I may be able to help, Leroy said. I've been building a case against Boyd for some time. With your documentation added to what I already have, we can file a civil suit for fraud. He won't be able to pay immediately, but we can secure a judgment against any future earnings. Renee studied him thoughtfully. This isn't just about helping me, is it? This is part of your plan. Leroy smiled slightly. Let's just say our interests align. You want your money back and protection from Boyd. I want to ensure he faces consequences for his actions. Does my motivation matter if the outcome benefits us both? I suppose not, Renee conceded. What's the next step? Over the next 2 weeks, Leroy's plan accelerated. With Renee's documentation added to his own evidence, Omar filed a comprehensive civil suit against Boyd for fraud, misrepresentation, and harassment. The restraining order was granted, prohibiting Boyd from coming within 500 feet of Renee or contacting her in any way. Boyd's response was predictable: panic. He called Leroy repeatedly, finally catching him on a Sunday afternoon. You're behind this, aren't you? Boyd demanded, his voice slurring slightly. The license investigation, the casino ban, and now this lawsuit with Renee. I have no idea what you're talking about, Leroy replied calmly. Bullshit, Boyd spat. You've been systematically destroying my life for months. This has to stop. Leroy's voice hardened. Like you stopped when you pursued my wife, when you convinced my children to call you daddy, when you try to take over my family. That was different, Boyd protested. Vanessa was unhappy. I didn't force her into anything. You targeted a vulnerable woman, manipulated her against her husband, used her for money, and then discarded her when things got difficult. Leroy corrected him. Just like you did with Renee and who knows how many others. I'm ruined, Leroy. Boyd's voice cracked with genuine desperation. The license board is suspending me pending investigation. The casino is suing me for unpaid debts. I can't get hired anywhere because of the gym firing. And now this fraud case? I'll never recover. That sounds like a personal problem, Leroy replied coldly. Perhaps you should have considered the potential consequences before you decided to destroy my family. What do you want? Boyd asked, defeat evident in his voice. Money? I don't have any. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. Just call off the dogs. I don't want anything from you, Leroy said. I've already taken back what's mine, my children, my dignity. You're merely experiencing the natural consequences of your actions. After hanging up, Leroy felt the familiar cold satisfaction. Boyd was spiraling exactly as planned. The first domino had fallen. The next target was Vanessa. While Boyd's destruction was professional and financial, Vanessa's would be more personal. Through Trish, Leroy had learned that Vanessa was struggling in Phoenix. Living in her parents' guest house had quickly become intolerable, with her mother's constant criticism and her father's thinly veiled disappointment. She'd found a job as an administrative assistant at a local medical practice, but the pay barely covered her child support payments and basic expenses. More importantly, she was desperate to rebuild her relationship with the children. The distance made it difficult, despite Leroy's adherence to the amended custody agreement, allowing extended visits during school breaks. It was this desperation that Leroy intended to leverage. When the children returned from their spring break visit to Phoenix, Cody was unusually quiet. After Melissa went to bed, Leroy found his son sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the night sky. Everything okay, buddy? Leroy asked, settling into the chair beside him. Cody shrugged. Mom's boyfriend was weird. Leroy's attention sharpened. Boyfriend? Your mom is dating someone. Some guy from her work? Cody explained. He stayed over a couple of nights. He kept trying to be all buddy-buddy with us, but it felt fake. The parallel to Boyd was unmistakable. Leroy kept his tone neutral. Did that make you uncomfortable? Cody nodded. Mom kept saying we needed to give him a chance, that he could be part of our family someday. I told her we already have a dad. He glanced at Leroy. That's what you always tell us, right? That no one can replace you as our dad. Leroy felt a surge of pride in his son's perception. That's right. No one can ever change that. That's what I told Mom, Cody continued. She got really upset, said I was being difficult on purpose. The information was perfect, exactly what Leroy needed. Thank you for telling me, Cody. I'll talk to your mom about this. The next day, Leroy called Omar. I need to modify the custody agreement again. Vanessa has a new boyfriend staying overnight during the children's visits. Cody says she's pressuring them to accept him as part of the family. Omar understood immediately. Given the history with Boyd, this could be considered a pattern of behavior harmful to the children's emotional well-being. I'll file a motion for supervised visitation only. The motion was granted surprisingly quickly. Judge Sandoval remembered the previous case well and viewed this new development as a continuation of Vanessa's poor judgment regarding the children's relationships with male figures. Vanessa was devastated. She called Leroy, sobbing. How could you do this? Mark is just a friend who stayed over because his apartment was being fumigated. That's not what Cody says, Leroy replied calmly. He says you told him Mark could be part of the family someday. Sound familiar, Vanessa? Like Boyd all over again. It's nothing like that. Vanessa protested. I've learned my lesson. I would never repeat that mistake. The judge disagrees, Leroy said. Supervised visitation only until you demonstrate better judgment. Please, Vanessa begged. The children are all I have left. Don't take them from me. For a moment, Leroy almost felt pity. Then he remembered his children calling Boyd daddy, and his resolve hardened. You did this to yourself, Vanessa. Actions have consequences. The final domino was about to fall. Chapter 8. The Wheels of Justice. 6 months into Leroy's campaign of retribution, the results were undeniable. Boyd Hughes had filed for bankruptcy, unable to pay the mounting judgments against him from the casino, Renee's fraud case, and various creditors. His physical therapy license had been suspended pending the investigation into his falsified continuing education credits, effectively ending his career. According to Marla's latest report, Boyd had left the state, moving to Nevada to work as a barback at a small casino, a humiliating step down for a man who once styled himself as a sophisticated professional. Vanessa remained in Phoenix, struggling with the limitations of supervised visitation and the financial strain of child support payments. Her parents' initial sympathy had soured into resentment, creating a tense living situation. She's talking about contesting the custody arrangement again, Trish reported during one of their regular updates. She's saying she'll prove you manipulated Cody into saying those things about Mark. Leroy had anticipated this. Let her try. Cody is old enough that the judge will interview him privately. He'll tell the truth. Don't you think this has gone far enough? Trish asked, looking troubled. Vanessa's a mess. She cries all the time, barely eats. Her relationship with her parents is falling apart. She lost her job last week. Why should I care? Leroy asked coldly. Trish sighed. Because you're not a monster, Leroy. What Vanessa and Boyd did was terrible, but this systematic destruction of their lives, it's changing you. Her words gave him pause. Had his pursuit of justice turned into something darker? He dismissed the thought. They had tried to steal everything from him, his family, his home, his identity as a father. They deserved everything that had happened to them. This isn't about revenge anymore, he told Trish. It's about protection. As long as Vanessa keeps trying to replace me with other men in my children's lives, I'll keep fighting her. But in the quiet moments, late at night when the children were asleep, Leroy sometimes questioned his own motivations. The cold satisfaction he felt at Boyd's downfall and Vanessa's struggles. Was that justice or something uglier? These reflections were interrupted by an unexpected development. Renee Simmons called with alarming news. Boyd's back in town, she said without preamble. And he's been asking about you. Leroy straightened in his chair. What do you mean? One of the trainers in my new gym knows him from before, Renee explained. Boyd approached him asking all sorts of questions about you. Your schedule, where you live, whether you're seeing anyone. It sounded concerning. Did he violate the restraining order? Leroy asked. No, he's been careful about that, Renee replied. But the way my trainer described it, Boyd seemed obsessed with you. Blamed you for everything that's happened to him. Leroy considered this information. Boyd had always struck him as a coward, more likely to run than confront. But desperation could change a man. Thank you for letting me know, he said. I'll take precautions. Those precautions included installing a security system at his home and informing his children's school about potential concerns. He also called Marla, requesting enhanced surveillance on Boyd's movements. 2 days later, Marla confirmed Renee's warning. Hughes is staying at the Motel 6 on Route 30, she reported. He's been drinking heavily and making threatening statements about you to anyone who'll listen. Has he attempted contact? Leroy asked. Not yet, Marla replied. But he's been driving past your house and the children's school. I've documented everything in case you need to file for a protective order. Leroy considered his options. A protective order might provoke Boyd rather than deter him. Better to let the man believe he was undetected for now, while monitoring his movements. The confrontation, when it came, was not what Leroy expected. He was working late at his office when the security desk called up. Mr. Fulton, there's a gentleman here insisting on seeing you. A Mr. Hughes. He seems agitated. Leroy's pulse quickened. I'll come down. In the lobby, Boyd looked like a shadow of his former self. Gone was the polished personal trainer with the perfect hair and confident smile. This Boyd was gaunt, with several days' stubble and bloodshot eyes. He reeked of alcohol. You finally got the guts to face me. Boyd slurred when he saw Leroy. Been avoiding me for days. Leroy remained calm. I've been aware of your presence, Boyd. The smart move would have been to stay in Nevada. Boyd's face contorted with anger. You ruined my life. Everything I built. Gone because of you. You built nothing, Leroy corrected him. You preyed on vulnerable women, stole their money, and moved on when things got complicated. I merely exposed what you already were. You had no right. Boyd took a step forward, drawing the attention of the security guard. Vanessa wanted me. The kids like me better than you. You couldn't accept that, so you destroyed everything. Leroy's voice turned glacial. You entered my home, slept with my wife, and encouraged my children to call you daddy. You have the audacity to stand there and claim I had no right to protect what's mine. Boyd's hand moved to his pocket, and Leroy tensed, but the security guard was faster, stepping between them. Sir, I need you to leave now, the guard told Boyd firmly, before I call the police. Boyd hesitated, then sneered at Leroy. This isn't over. Actually, it is, Leroy replied. You're finished, Boyd. You have nothing left to threaten me with. After Boyd was escorted out, Leroy called Omar. I need an emergency protective order. Boyd Hughes just confronted me in my office. He may have been armed. Within hours, a temporary protective order was in place. The police conducted a welfare check at Boyd's motel room, but reported he had already checked out. We'll patrol near your residence tonight, the officer assured Leroy. But you might want to consider staying elsewhere until we locate him. Leroy arranged for the children to stay with Dwayne and his wife for the night, then returned home to gather some essentials. As he was packing a bag, the doorbell rang. Checking the security camera, Leroy was stunned to see Vanessa standing on his porch. He opened the door cautiously. What are you doing here? He demanded. You're supposed to be in Phoenix. Vanessa looked terrible, thin, with dark circles under her eyes and a haunted expression. Boyd called me, she said without preamble. He's completely unhinged, Leroy. He threatened to hurt you and take the kids. Leroy's blood ran cold. When did he call you? About an hour ago, Vanessa replied, shivering despite the warm evening. He said he was going to make you pay, that he'd take everything from you like you took everything from him. The children are safe, Leroy assured her, surprised by her apparent concern. They're with Dwayne. Come inside. Once in the living room, Vanessa seemed to collapse in on herself. This is all my fault, she whispered. I let him into our lives. I believe his lies. And now he's threatening our children. The police are looking for him, Leroy said. There's a protective order in place. Vanessa laughed bitterly. A piece of paper won't stop him. You didn't hear him, Leroy. He's lost everything. He has nothing left to lose. Why come warn me? Leroy asked, studying her carefully. Why not just call? Because I needed you to believe me, Vanessa said simply. After everything, I know you have no reason to trust anything I say. But this is about our children. Before Leroy could respond, his phone rang. It was Marla. Hughes just checked into the Sunset Motel, 2 miles from your house, she reported. And he purchased a handgun 3 days ago at a pawn shop in Nevada. Legal sale, but concerning given his current state. Leroy's decision was immediate. Call the police. Tell them everything you know. He hung up and turned to Vanessa. Boyd has a gun. The police are being notified. Fear flashed across Vanessa's face. Oh God, what have I done? Bringing him into our lives, near our children. You need to leave, Leroy told her. Go to a hotel. Go back to Phoenix. Just get away from here until Boyd is in custody. Vanessa shook her head. No, I'm done running from my mistakes. I'm going to the police station to make a statement about his threats. Maybe that will help them find him faster. Leroy was surprised by her resolve. I'll drive you. As they headed to Leroy's car, a vehicle turned sharply into the driveway, blocking them in. Boyd emerged, unsteady on his feet, a pistol in his hand. Well, isn't this touching? He slurred, gesturing with the gun. The happy couple, back together. Leroy pushed Vanessa behind him. Boyd put the gun down. The police are already on their way. Boyd laughed, a broken sound. Of course they are. You've thought of everything, haven't you, Leroy? Always one step ahead. This won't solve anything, Leroy said calmly, though his heart was pounding. You're just making things worse for yourself. Worse? Boyd's laugh turned hysterical. How could anything be worse? I lost my license, my business, my reputation. I'm living in flea bag motels, working for minimum wage. And it's all because of you. No, Vanessa spoke up, stepping out from behind Leroy. It's because of me. I'll let you manipulate me. I betrayed my family for you. Leroy was just protecting what was his. Boyd's gaze shifted to Vanessa, his expression darkening. You're defending him now? After everything we had? We had nothing, Vanessa replied firmly. You used me to get what you wanted. You used my children. Boyd's hand tightened on the gun. Shut up. Both of you just shut up. Leroy tensed, ready to move if Boyd raised the weapon. But instead, Boyd seemed to deflate, the gun lowering slightly. I just wanted what you had, he said, his voice suddenly small. The perfect family, the nice house. Is that so wrong? You could have built your own life, Leroy replied. Instead, you tried to steal mine. In the distance, police sirens wailed. Boyd's head snapped up, panic replacing the brief vulnerability. No more talking, he snarled, raising the gun again. You took everything from me. Now I take something from you. Time seemed to slow as Boyd aimed the weapon. Leroy lunged forward, tackling Boyd just as the gun discharged. They crashed to the ground, wrestling for control of the weapon. Vanessa screamed, and then suddenly multiple police officers were there, shouting commands. Drop the weapon. Police. Boyd's resistance crumbled. The gun fell from his hand, and officers quickly secured him, pulling him away from Leroy. Are you hit? One officer asked Leroy, helping him to his feet. Leroy shook his head, breathing hard. No, we're okay. As Boyd was led to a police cruiser, he locked eyes with Leroy one last time. This isn't over, he called out. You'll never be free of me. Actually, it is over, Leroy replied calmly. Attempted murder with a firearm carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in this state. By the time you get out, Boyd, no one will even remember your name. Later, at the police station, after providing their statements, Leroy and Vanessa sat in silence in the waiting area. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them both exhausted. Thank you, Vanessa said finally, for saving my life back there. Leroy nodded, but said nothing. I know you'll never forgive me, she continued. I don't expect you to, but I want you to know I regret everything. Not just because of how it turned out, but because of what I did to you and the children. Leroy studied her, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. What happens now, Vanessa? You go back to Phoenix, back to supervised visitation. She shook her head. I'm moving back here, if I can find work. I want to be closer to the kids, even if it's just for supervised visits. My parents are selling their house anyway, downsizing for retirement. And if Boyd makes bail, he won't, Vanessa said confidently. The detective said the judge would deny bail given the circumstances. She hesitated, then added, even if he did, I'm done being afraid. I let fear and insecurity drive me into Boyd's arms. I won't make that mistake again. Something had shifted between them, not forgiveness. Leroy knew he would never fully forgive her betrayal, but perhaps a recognition that they would always be connected through their children. I'll have Omar revise the custody agreement, he said finally. If you're living locally, we can adjust the visitation schedule. Still supervised, but more frequent. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Leroy stood, ready to leave. You're right about that, but it's what the children deserve. As he walked away, Leroy felt a strange sense of closure. Boyd would face justice for his crimes. Vanessa had finally acknowledged her role in the destruction of their family. The systematic revenge Leroy had orchestrated had accomplished its purpose. But the true victory, he realized, wasn't in their downfall. It was in his own resilience, in rebuilding a life for himself and his children from the ashes of betrayal. The wheel of justice had come full circle. Chapter 9. Ashes and Embers. 1 year after Boyd's arrest, Leroy stood in his backyard, tending to the grill as Cody and Melissa played with their friends in the sprinkler. The summer evening was perfect, warm air cooling as the sun descended, the scent of charcoal and marinated chicken, children's laughter carrying across the lawn. Need a hand with those? Dwayne asked, approaching with 2 beers. Leroy accepted one gratefully. Almost done. Kids worked up an appetite with all that running around. They stood in companionable silence, watching the children's antics. At 11, Cody was showing signs of the teenager he would soon become, while 9-year-old Melissa remained caught between childhood and the growing awareness of adolescence. You've done a good job with them, Dwayne observed. After everything they've been through. Leroy nodded, acknowledging the compliment. The past year had brought significant changes. Boyd had pleaded guilty to attempted murder and weapons charges, receiving a 25-year sentence with no possibility of parole for at least 18 years. The plea deal had spared everyone the trauma of a trial. Vanessa had indeed moved back to the area, finding work as an office manager at a dental practice. True to her word, she had focused on rebuilding her relationship with the children, never missing a supervised visitation and gradually earning back their trust. 3 months ago, the court had modified the visitation order, removing the supervision requirement while maintaining Leroy's primary custody. It had been his decision not to contest the change, a recognition that despite her failings, Vanessa was still their mother. Trish says Vanessa's seeing someone new, Dwayne mentioned casually. Some dentist from her practice. Taking it really slow, apparently. Leroy flipped the chicken, unconcerned. Good for her. You're not worried about history repeating itself? Dwayne asked. Leroy shook his head. Vanessa learned her lesson the hard way. Besides, the custody agreement has safeguards now. No overnight visits with romantic partners while the children are present. No introducing partners to the kids without prior discussion. And you? Any interest in dating again? Dwayne pressed. Renee seems to think highly of you. Leroy smiled slightly. Renee and I are friends. She's still recovering from her own Boyd experience. Not everyone is Vanessa or Boyd, Dwayne pointed out. Some people are actually decent. I know, Leroy acknowledged. But I'm focused on the kids right now. They've had enough change and turmoil. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Omar and his wife, bearing side dishes for the barbecue. Soon the backyard was filled with friends, colleagues, and neighbors enjoying the summer evening. Leroy moved among them, the gracious host, but part of him remained detached, observing. He had rebuilt his life piece by piece. A new home, strengthened friendships, career success, and most importantly, a solid foundation with his children. The rage that had driven him to systematically destroy Boyd and Vanessa had burned itself out, leaving behind a cooler, more calculated perspective. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Leroy sat alone on the back porch, nursing a final beer. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, he felt a jolt of surprise. Thank you for allowing the visitation change. The kids seem happier. I know I don't deserve your consideration, but I appreciate it. V. Leroy stared at the message for a long moment before responding. I didn't do it for you. I did it for them. Her reply came quickly. I know. That's why you're a better parent than I ever was. I'm trying to learn from your example. Leroy didn't respond, but he didn't delete the message either. It represented something he hadn't expected. Acknowledgement from Vanessa that her betrayal had been wrong, not just because of the consequences she suffered, but because of the pain it caused. The following weekend, when he dropped the children off for their visit with Vanessa, he actually exchanged a few civil words with her. Not friendly, not warm, but not openly hostile either. Cody has a science project due Tuesday, he informed her. He's got the materials, but he'll need to work on it this weekend. Vanessa nodded. I'll make sure he has time. We can work on it together tomorrow. An awkward pause followed. Then Vanessa said, I've been meaning to ask. Melissa's birthday is next month. I know it falls on my weekend, but I was thinking we could do a joint celebration. Something small at the park, maybe? So she doesn't have to choose between us. The old Leroy would have refused outright, seeing it as Vanessa trying to insert herself back into his life. But the man he'd become recognized that this wasn't about him or Vanessa. It was about Melissa. That makes sense, he said finally. Let me know what you're thinking, and we'll coordinate. The relief on Vanessa's face was evident. Thank you. As he drove away, Leroy reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. From the devastating discovery of betrayal to the cold, methodical execution of revenge, and finally to this point. Not forgiveness, never that, but perhaps a kind of detached peace. Boyd remained in prison, his attempts to appeal his sentence denied. According to the last update Leroy had received, he'd become a model prisoner, participating in therapy and educational programs. It meant nothing to Leroy. Boyd had made his choices and would live with the consequences for decades to come. Vanessa continued her efforts to rebuild her relationship with the children, accepting the limitations Leroy imposed without complaint. She would never again be the woman he had married, never again hold his trust or affection. But for the children's sake, he could maintain a civil coexistence. That evening, Leroy received an unexpected visitor. Renee Simmons stood on his doorstep, a bottle of wine in hand. "Thought you might want some company," she said with a slight smile. The first quiet weekend after the kids start visitation is always the hardest. Leroy raised an eyebrow. "Speaking from experience?" "My daughter visits her father every other weekend," Renee confirmed. 5 years post-divorce, and I still hate the silence when she's gone. He invited her in, appreciating her straightforward manner. They developed an unusual friendship in the aftermath of the Boyd situation. Two people who understood what it meant to be betrayed, to seek justice, and to rebuild. "How's the fraud case going?" Leroy asked as he poured the wine. Renee shrugged. "The judgment is just paper at this point. Boyd has nothing to pay with, and won't for decades. But it was never really about the money." "No," Leroy agreed. "It was about making sure he couldn't do it again." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Renee spoke again. "You know, I admire how you've handled all this. The revenge was thorough." She smiled slightly. "But you've moved beyond it. Some people get stuck in that phase, letting the bitterness consume them." "Who says I've moved beyond it?" Leroy challenged, though without heat. "The fact that you're allowing Vanessa more time with the kids," Renee pointed out. "The man consumed by revenge wouldn't do that." Leroy considered her words. "I haven't forgiven her, if that's what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything," Renee replied. "Just observing that you've prioritized your children's well-being over punishing their mother. That takes strength." Later, after Renee had gone, Leroy found himself reflecting on her observation. Had he moved beyond revenge? The cold satisfaction he'd once felt at Vanessa and Boyd's downfall had faded, replaced by something more complex. Not forgiveness. He would never forgive their betrayal, but perhaps a recognition that continuing to actively punish them served no purpose. The damage had been done. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Boyd would spend decades in prison. Vanessa had lost her marriage, her home, her reputation, and full access to her children. The systematic revenge Leroy had orchestrated had accomplished its purpose. Now, his focus was on building something new from the ashes of betrayal, a life centered on his children, his career, and the relationships with people who had proven their loyalty during the darkest times. The final test came 6 months later, when Vanessa requested a modification to the custody arrangement. She had been offered a significant promotion that would require occasional travel and asked for more flexibility in the visitation schedule. Omar advised against it. "We have the upper hand legally. There's no need to accommodate her career advancement." But Leroy found himself considering a different perspective. "The promotion means better financial security for the children," he pointed out. "And Vanessa has been consistent with visitation, following all the court's guidelines. Are you actually defending her?" Omar asked, surprised. "No," Leroy said firmly. "I'm being practical. The children benefit from her financial stability. And they're older now. Cody's almost 13. They understand the situation better." In the end, Leroy agreed to a modified schedule that allowed for some flexibility while maintaining his primary custody. It wasn't a concession to Vanessa, but a decision made in the best interests of Cody and Melissa. When he informed Vanessa of his decision, she seemed genuinely touched. "Thank you, Leroy. This means a lot. Don't mistake this for forgiveness," he said, his voice hard. "I will never forgive what you and Boyd did. Never." Vanessa's expression sobered. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it." "No, you don't," Leroy agreed. "But the children deserve parents who can at least be civil to each other." As the years passed, Leroy maintained this position. He never forgave Vanessa's betrayal, never fully trusted her again, never allowed himself to be vulnerable to her manipulation. But for the sake of the children, he established a detached, business-like coexistence. Boyd occasionally sent letters from prison, seeking forgiveness or understanding. Leroy returned them unopened. Some betrayals were beyond redemption, beyond forgiveness. Boyd had tried to steal everything from him: his family, his home, his identity as a father. Such actions could never be forgiven. 5 years after the divorce, at Cody's middle school graduation, Leroy found himself standing next to Vanessa as they watched their son receive an academic achievement award. "He's so much like you," Vanessa observed quietly. "That same determination," Leroy nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "He's going to do well in high school." A brief, awkward silence followed. Then Vanessa said, "I want you to know, I understand now why you did what you did. The revenge, the calculated destruction of Boyd and me. You were protecting what was yours." Leroy studied her for a moment. "It wasn't just revenge. It was justice." "Yes," Vanessa agreed, surprising him. "It was justice. Harsh, but deserved." They didn't speak of it again. They didn't need to. The understanding between them was clear. What had happened could never be undone, never be truly forgiven, but they had found a way to coexist for the sake of their children. And for Leroy, that was enough. He had rebuilt his life from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more resilient than before. He had protected his children, ensured justice was served, and emerged not as a victim, but as a survivor. In the end, that was the most complete revenge of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Patrick Hardy had built his life on 3 pillars: family, loyalty, and strength. At 42, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction company, Hardy Foundations, had grown from a one-man operation to a multi-million-dollar empire spanning 3 states. But Patrick's greatest pride wasn't his business. It was his family. 20 years of marriage to Chris Hardy had given him what he thought was everything a man could want. She was beautiful, charming, and the mother of his 18-year-old daughter, Amy. Patrick had met Chris when she was just 19, a small-town girl from Oregon whose father, Russell Bush, ran a failing auto repair shop. Patrick had swept her off her feet, married her within a year, and moved her to his growing empire in Colorado. Patrick's philosophy was simple. Those who earned his trust received his unwavering loyalty, but those who betrayed it faced consequences that would haunt them forever. He learned this lesson early from his own father, a steel worker who taught him that a man's word was his bond and his family was his fortress. Chris had always seemed to understand this about her husband. She played the perfect wife role, attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties for his business associates, and maintaining their pristine image in Denver social circles. Amy, their daughter, had inherited Patrick's strong will and Chris's beauty. She was set to start college in the fall, planning to study business to eventually join Hardy Foundations. But beneath the surface of this perfect family portrait, cracks had been forming for months. Patrick had noticed small changes in Chris: secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, new clothes that didn't appear on their credit card statements. His instincts, honed by years of reading people in business deals, told him something was wrong. However, he dismissed these feelings, telling himself that 20 years of marriage had earned Chris the benefit of the doubt. The irony wasn't lost on Patrick that he could read the intentions of corrupt contractors and scheming competitors like an open book, yet he'd chosen to ignore the signs in his own home. Perhaps it was love, or perhaps it was the arrogance of a man who believed his fortress was impenetrable. Trevor Garrison had entered their lives 6 months ago as Chris's new personal trainer. At 35, Trevor possessed the kind of rugged charm that made women forget their vows and men question their own masculinity. He'd moved to Denver from California, claiming he wanted a fresh start after a messy divorce. Patrick had even liked the man initially. Trevor was articulate, seemed professional, and had impressive credentials. What Patrick didn't know was that Trevor specialized in more than fitness training. He was a predator who targeted wealthy, neglected wives, seducing them with attention their husbands were too busy to provide. Trevor had researched the Hardy family extensively before taking the job, knowing exactly what kind of goldmine he'd discovered in Chris. The affair had begun innocently enough: extended training sessions, intimate conversations about Chris's unfulfilled dreams, and gradually escalating physical contact. Trevor was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to make a woman feel desired and understood. He'd convinced Chris that her husband took her for granted, that she deserved passion and excitement. For Chris, the affair represented everything missing from her marriage. Patrick's success had made him increasingly absent, focused on expanding his empire, while she felt like a beautiful decoration in their mansion. Trevor offered her adventure, spontaneity, and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted for more than just her ability to play the perfect wife. Amy, caught between her parents' growing distance, had begun acting out. Her grades suffered, she'd started drinking at parties, and she'd recently been arrested for reckless driving, an incident Patrick had quietly made disappear with a few phone calls. He'd attributed her behavior to typical teenage rebellion, never imagining the chaos brewing beneath his roof. The family's carefully constructed facade was maintained through years of practice. Sunday dinners, family vacations, public appearances, all performed with the precision of seasoned actors. Patrick threw himself deeper into work. Chris lost herself in her secret affair, and Amy spiraled into increasingly dangerous behavior as she sensed the impending explosion. Russell Bush, Chris's father, had been battling cancer for the past year. The old man had never particularly liked Patrick, seeing him as the city slicker who'd stolen his daughter away from small-town Oregon. But Russell was proud, too proud to accept charity from his wealthy son-in-law. Even his medical bills mounted and his auto shop struggled to stay afloat. When Russell's condition worsened 2 weeks ago, Patrick had insisted on personally caring for him, seeing it as his duty as a son-in-law. He'd moved into Russell's small house in Bend, Oregon, sleeping on a lumpy couch and helping the stubborn old man through his final days. It was a gesture that Chris had praised publicly, while secretly celebrating the freedom it gave her to intensify her affair with Trevor. During those 2 weeks, Patrick had gained a new perspective on his life. Watching Russell fight his losing battle with dignity and grace made Patrick reflect on what truly mattered. He decided to return home early, planning to surprise Chris and Amy with a renewed commitment to putting family first. He'd even stopped at a jewelry store in Denver, purchasing an expensive necklace for Chris as a symbol of his desire to reconnect. The construction king who could build anything had failed to notice that his own foundation was crumbling. As Patrick drove through Denver's affluent neighborhoods toward his mansion, he felt optimistic about the future. He had no idea that he was about to discover a betrayal so profound it would unleash a darkness within him that even he didn't know existed. The pieces were in place for a collision that would destroy lives and reveal the true nature of everyone involved. Patrick Hardy, the man who never forgave betrayal, was about to face the ultimate test of that principle from the people he loved most. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The 2 weeks Patrick spent caring for Russell Bush were transformative in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The old man, despite his illness, possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. During long nights when pain kept Russell awake, he'd regaled Patrick with stories of his younger days, his dreams, and his disappointments. "You know what your problem is, Patrick?" Russell had said during one of their late-night conversations, his voice weakened by chemotherapy, but his eyes still piercing. "You think providing for someone is the same as loving them. Your wife doesn't need another diamond bracelet. She needs a husband who sees her as more than a trophy." Patrick had dismissed the comment at the time, attributing it to Russell's pain medication and general dislike of him. But the words lingered, especially when Russell continued his brutal honesty. "Chris was never meant for this city life you've given her. She was a wild girl, full of dreams and passion. You've turned her into a museum piece, beautiful to look at but not allowed to be touched or moved." The irony was that while Patrick received this unwanted wisdom about his marriage, Chris was 300 miles away, living out the very passion Russell described, just not with her husband. In Denver, Chris had grown bolder during Patrick's absence. Trevor no longer limited their encounters to hotel rooms and gym sessions. He'd been staying at the Hardy mansion, sleeping in the guest room officially, but spending his nights in the master bedroom. They'd grown careless, leaving evidence of their affair scattered throughout the house like breadcrumbs waiting to be discovered. Amy had initially been appalled by her mother's behavior. She'd confronted Chris during the first week of Patrick's absence, threatening to call her father and expose the affair. But Chris had manipulated her daughter with devastating effectiveness. "Your father doesn't love me anymore, Amy," Chris had wept, playing the victim with Academy Award-worthy performance. "He's married to his business, not to me. Trevor makes me feel alive again. Don't you want your mother to be happy?" The manipulation had worked partially because Amy was already struggling with her own issues. Her recent arrest had left her feeling guilty and rebellious simultaneously. Her relationship with Patrick had grown strained as she'd begun to see him as an authoritarian figure more than a loving father. When Chris painted Patrick as the neglectful husband, it resonated with Amy's own feelings of being overlooked in favor of business priorities. But the final nail in Amy's resistance came when Trevor turned his manipulative charm on her. He convinced Amy that she was mature beyond her years, that she understood adult complexities her father couldn't grasp. He'd filled her head with poison about Patrick being controlling and old-fashioned, while positioning himself as the cool, understanding figure who truly got both mother and daughter. "Your mom deserves happiness, Amy," Trevor had said during one of their conversations by the pool. "And you deserve parents who are truly in love, not just going through the motions. Sometimes people need to make difficult choices to find their authentic selves." Trevor's greatest talent wasn't seduction. It was psychological manipulation. He'd identified each family member's weaknesses and exploited them masterfully. With Chris, he'd targeted her feelings of neglect and desire for excitement. With Amy, he'd appealed to her teenage rebellion and need to feel sophisticated. As the days passed, the affair intensified beyond physical betrayal. Chris began sharing intimate details about Patrick's business, his weaknesses, his fears. She revealed his bank account information, his business strategies, even his passwords. Love affairs often involve emotional spillage, but this went far beyond pillow talk. Chris was essentially handing Trevor a roadmap to her husband's destruction. Trevor, for his part, was already planning his next moves. He convinced Chris that they should be together permanently, but he needed to ensure he wouldn't lose access to the Hardy fortune in the process. He'd begun researching divorce laws, Patrick's business vulnerabilities, and ways to maximize Chris's settlement. His endgame wasn't just stealing another man's wife. It was destroying the man entirely and taking everything he'd built. The transformation in both women was remarkable. Chris, who'd been the picture of elegant restraint for 20 years, became wild and reckless. She'd started drinking heavily, making impulsive purchases, and treating the household staff with increasing disdain. The mask of perfection she'd worn for 2 decades was finally cracking, revealing someone Patrick had never truly known. Amy's changes were equally dramatic. She'd gone from being daddy's little girl to actively participating in the deception against him. She'd learned to lie convincingly, to cover for her mother's absences, and to redirect her father's questions during their phone calls. The guilt of betraying Patrick warred with her anger toward him, creating a volatile emotional cocktail that made her increasingly unpredictable. The mansion itself began to reflect the moral decay occurring within its walls. Rooms that had always been meticulously maintained showed signs of neglect. The housekeeper, Maria, had been dismissed suddenly by Chris, who claimed they needed privacy during this difficult time with Russell's illness. In reality, Chris couldn't risk having witnesses to the affair. Trevor had also begun establishing himself as more than just a guest. He'd moved personal items into the house, started answering the phone when Patrick called, and even began making suggestions about redecorating. His audacity was breathtaking, but it served a purpose. He was psychologically claiming territory, making himself indispensable to Chris while simultaneously erasing Patrick's presence from his own home. The neighborhood began to notice changes too. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman next door, observed strange cars coming and going at odd hours. She'd seen Chris and Trevor together in compromising situations in the backyard, though she'd initially assumed Trevor was just a very friendly trainer. The postman noticed that mail was piling up, that the usually pristine landscaping was becoming overgrown. Meanwhile, in Oregon, Patrick was experiencing his own transformation. Caring for Russell had reconnected him with his own mortality and values. He'd spent hours reflecting on his marriage, his relationship with Amy, and his priorities. He'd made mental plans to scale back his business involvement, to take Chris on a second honeymoon, to be more present for Amy's final year before college. Russell's death came on a Tuesday morning, peaceful but still devastating. Despite their complicated relationship, Patrick had grown to respect the old man's honest perspective on life. As he arranged the funeral and settled Russell's affairs, Patrick felt a sense of duty fulfilled and looked forward to returning home to begin rebuilding his family relationships. The final irony was that as Patrick drove home with renewed hope for his marriage, Chris was in their bedroom with Trevor, planning how to ask for a divorce. She convinced herself that she'd fallen truly in love for the first time in her life, and that Patrick would eventually understand. In her selfishness, she'd completely underestimated the man she'd lived with for 20 years. Patrick Hardy was about to come home to a house that was no longer his, to a family that had already betrayed him, and to a life that had been systematically dismantled in his absence. The foundation he'd spent decades building was about to collapse, and the man who emerged from the rubble would be someone none of them recognized. Chapter 3: The Moment of Truth. Patrick's Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway of his mansion at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. He'd driven straight through from Oregon, fueled by grief for Russell and anticipation of reuniting with his family. The house was ablaze with lights, which surprised him since Chris usually preferred dimmer lighting in the evenings. Several cars were parked in the driveway, vehicles he didn't recognize. His first thought was that Chris might be hosting one of her charity committee meetings, though he couldn't remember any events scheduled for tonight. Patrick grabbed his overnight bag and the jewelry box containing Chris's surprise necklace, walking toward the front door with tired but hopeful steps. The front door was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells in Patrick's mind. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he'd always insisted on proper security protocols. As he stepped into the foyer, he could hear music and laughter coming from the back of the house, sounds of celebration that seemed inappropriate given Russell's recent death. Patrick set down his bags and followed the noise through his own home, feeling increasingly like an intruder. The living room showed signs of recent partying: empty wine bottles, scattered clothing, cushions thrown carelessly on the floor. His home, usually maintained to museum standards, looked like a fraternity house after a weekend bender. As he approached the sliding glass doors leading to the pool area, Patrick could see figures in the water and around the deck. What he witnessed next would be burned into his memory forever. Chris was in the pool with Trevor, locked in a passionate embrace that left no doubt about their relationship. Amy sat at the pool's edge, drinking wine and laughing as she watched her mother betray her father. But it wasn't just the physical affair that shattered Patrick. It was the complete transformation of his family. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent development. The ease with which they interacted, the comfort level, the way Amy participated in the celebration. This had been going on for months, possibly longer. Patrick stood frozen behind the glass door, watching his world collapse in real time. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of fatherhood, a lifetime of trust and love, all revealed to be an elaborate deception. But what cut deepest was Amy's laughter. His little girl, whom he'd protected and provided for, was celebrating his betrayal. Trevor noticed Patrick first. Instead of showing shame or fear, he smiled and waved, as if greeting an old friend. The audacity was breathtaking. Chris followed Trevor's gaze and saw her husband standing in the doorway. For a moment, her face showed genuine shock and fear. But then something shifted in her expression. Defiance replaced shame. "Patrick," she called out, not bothering to separate from Trevor. "You're early." Amy's reaction was the most devastating. When she saw her father, her laughter died, but her eyes showed no remorse, only irritation at being caught. The daughter who'd once been his greatest joy now looked at him like he was an unwelcome intruder in his own home. Patrick slid open the door and stepped onto the deck. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence. 3 pairs of eyes watched him, calculating his next move. But Patrick had perfected the art of emotional control in countless business negotiations. His face remained impassive as he surveyed the scene. "Trevor," Patrick said calmly, his voice carrying none of the rage burning inside him. "I trust you've been taking good care of my family." Trevor, emboldened by what he mistook for Patrick's weakness, actually laughed. "Better than you have, apparently." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Patrick had faced down union bosses, corrupt politicians, and ruthless competitors, but none of those confrontations had prepared him for this moment. His family, the people he'd built his entire life around, had not just betrayed him, but were now openly mocking him. Chris finally found her voice. "Patrick, we need to talk. Things have changed while you were gone." "Have they?" Patrick asked, his tone still eerily calm. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what looked like emails, though he was actually buying time to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Amy, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to defuse the situation with teenage logic. "Dad, you can't be that surprised. You never hear anyway. Mom deserves to be happy." The words hit Patrick like physical blows. His own daughter, defending her mother's affair, reducing 20 years of sacrifice and love to a simple matter of presence versus absence. But what Amy didn't understand was that she'd just sealed her own fate in Patrick's mind. Betrayal was one thing, but defending the betrayal was unforgivable. "I see," Patrick said quietly. He looked at each of them in turn, his wife, his daughter, the man who'd invaded his home and destroyed his family. "Russell died this morning. I thought you should know." The announcement created a moment of awkward silence. Chris's face showed a flicker of genuine emotion. Her father was dead, and she'd been celebrating with her lover instead of mourning. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by defensive anger. "You could have called," she said, though they all knew Patrick had tried calling multiple times over the past few days, only to be sent a voicemail or given brief, dismissive conversations. "I wanted to tell you in person," Patrick replied. "I wanted to come home to my family." The emphasis on my family was subtle but unmistakable. Trevor, either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant, chose that moment to assert his dominance. "Patrick, look, this is awkward for everyone. Maybe you should stay in a hotel tonight. Give us all time to process this situation like adults." The suggestion that Patrick should leave his own home might have been the final straw for another man. But Patrick Hardy had built his fortune by thinking strategically, by planning his moves carefully, and by never acting on impulse when the stakes were high. He looked at Trevor for a long moment, memorizing every detail of the man's face. "You're right," Patrick said finally. "This is very awkward." He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving 3 very confused people behind him. In the master bedroom, his bedroom, Patrick found evidence of Trevor's extended stay. Men's clothing in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, even family photos turned face down on the nightstands. The violation was complete and systematic. They hadn't just betrayed him, they'd erased him. Patrick packed a small bag while his mind raced through possibilities. He could confront them with violence. He was certainly capable of it. He could call his lawyers immediately and begin divorce proceedings. He could throw them all out of his house tonight. But none of those options satisfied the cold fury building inside him. As he prepared to leave, Patrick's eyes fell on the jewelry box containing Chris's surprise necklace. He opened it and looked at the diamonds that had cost him more than most people earned in a year. Then he closed the box and placed it carefully in his bag. Someday, he might find a use for it. Before leaving, Patrick made one stop in his home office. He had important documents to secure, bank accounts to protect, and plans to make. His family thought they'd won by choosing honesty over deception. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a man who'd never lost a fight that mattered. As Patrick drove away from his mansion for what he suspected might be the last time, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years: absolute clarity. The foundation of his life had crumbled, but foundations could be rebuilt. And sometimes, before you could build something new, you had to completely demolish what came before. Behind him, in the house that was no longer his home, three people celebrated what they thought was their victory. They had no idea that Patrick Hardy had just transformed from a devoted husband and father into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from their destruction. Chapter 4: The Awakening. Patrick checked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown, though sleep was impossible. He spent the night in the hotel's business center, using secure internet connections to begin what would become the most important project of his life. By dawn, he had a clear picture of his enemy's vulnerabilities and the beginnings of a plan that would make his business competitors' downfalls look merciful in comparison. His first discovery was that Trevor Garrison's background was even more sordid than Patrick had imagined. The man wasn't just a predatory personal trainer. He was a professional con artist with a string of wealthy victims across multiple states. Trevor's real name was Trevor Garrison Michaels, and he'd been married 4 times, each marriage ending with substantial settlements that funded his lifestyle. He'd been sued twice for fraud and once for extortion, though charges had been dropped when his victims chose to pay him off rather than endure public humiliation. But Trevor had made a critical error in choosing the Hardy family as his latest target. Unlike his previous victims, lonely widows and neglected wives with inherited wealth, Patrick Hardy was a self-made man who understood power, leverage, and the art of war. The second revelation was even more devastating. Amy had been aware of her mother's affair for months and had actively participated in concealing it. Patrick found text messages on a family phone plan that revealed the depth of his daughter's betrayal. She hadn't just known about the affair. She'd helped orchestrate it, providing alibis, covering for unexplained absences, and even warning Chris when Patrick's business trips were delayed. One particular message thread between Amy and her friend Jessica revealed the true extent of the conspiracy. Amy: Dad's suspicious about Mom's new workout schedule. Think I should distract him with my college drama again. Jessica: Your mom's trainer is so hot though. Can't blame her for wanting some excitement. Amy: Trevor's actually really cool. He gets that Dad is basically an absent workaholic. Mom deserves better. Jessica: Are you seriously supporting your mom's affair? Amy: I'm supporting my mom's happiness. Dad will figure it out eventually, and honestly, maybe it's for the best. Reading those messages, Patrick felt something inside him die completely. The last vestiges of his old life. The loving father, the devoted husband, the man who believed in forgiveness and second chances, simply ceased to exist. By 6 a.m., Patrick had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Trevor Garrison Michaels. Financial records, criminal history, immigration status. Trevor was actually Canadian, living in the U.S. on an expired visa, previous victims, and most importantly, current vulnerabilities. Trevor owed substantial debts to some very unforgiving people, had outstanding warrants in 2 states, and was currently being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion. But Patrick's most valuable discovery came from Trevor's own arrogance. The man had been documenting his conquest of the Hardy family on social media and private forums dedicated to lifestyle coaching, a euphemism for wealthy women seduction. Trevor had shared intimate details about Chris's vulnerabilities, Patrick's business secrets, and even Amy's emotional manipulation. He'd essentially created a detailed confession of his crimes, thinking himself untouchable. Chris's betrayal ran deeper than adultery. Patrick discovered that she'd been accessing his business accounts, sharing confidential information about upcoming deals, and even attempting to transfer funds to accounts Trevor had helped her establish. What she didn't realize was that Patrick had always maintained hidden safeguards on their shared finances. Every transaction was monitored, every unusual activity flagged. He'd been protecting their money from external threats while his wife plotted to steal it from within. At 7 a.m., Patrick's phone rang. It was Chris, her voice a mixture of fake concern and barely concealed irritation. Patrick, where are you? We need to talk about this situation rationally. I'm exactly where I need to be, Patrick replied calmly. How are you feeling about your father's death, Chris? I know how close you two were. The question caught her off guard. She'd been preparing for accusations about the affair, not reminders of her father's death. That's not fair, Patrick. You know I'm grieving. Are you? Because last night, you seemed to be celebrating something entirely different. There was a long pause. When Chris spoke again, her voice had changed. The pretense of the wounded wife was gone, replaced by cold calculation. Patrick, I want a divorce. Trevor and I are in love, and this marriage has been over for years. We can do this amicably, or we can make it ugly. Your choice. Amicably, Patrick repeated. After 20 years of marriage, you think there's an amicable way to dissolve our life together for your personal trainer? He's not just a personal trainer, and you know it. Trevor understands me in ways you never have. He makes me feel alive. I'm sure he does. Where's Amy? Amy supports our decision. She's old enough to understand that people grow apart, that marriage isn't a prison sentence. Patrick closed his eyes, feeling the last door to reconciliation slam shut. I see. And has Amy chosen which parent she wants to live with during this transition? She wants to stay with me. With us. Patrick, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Patrick interrupted. More perfectly than you can imagine. After ending the call, Patrick made his first tactical move. He called his head of security, Malcolm Dunham, a former Marine who'd worked for Hardy Foundations for 8 years. Malcolm had always been more than an employee. He was one of the few people Patrick trusted completely. Malcolm, I need you to meet me at the downtown office. And Malcolm? We're going to war. Malcolm Dunham had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before joining Patrick's company. He understood warfare, both foreign and domestic. When Patrick explained the situation, Malcolm's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened with military precision. What do you need, boss? I need Trevor Garrison to disappear from my family's life. Permanently. But I need it to be his choice, not our coercion. Can you make that happen? Malcolm smiled for the first time in their conversation. Trevor Garrison, or Trevor Garrison Michaels. Because I've already run a preliminary background check, and this guy has more problems than he realizes. You've already investigated him? Boss, the moment a strange man starts spending time around your family, I investigate. It's what you pay me for. This particular guy, let's just say he's borrowed money from some very unfriendly people in Las Vegas. Patrick felt a cold satisfaction. How unfriendly? The kind who break legs first and ask questions later. Apparently, Trevor convinced some mob-connected loan sharks to invest in his fitness empire about 6 months ago. He was supposed to open a chain of high-end gyms. Instead, he used the money to fund his lifestyle and his pursuit of your wife. How much does he owe? $800,000 plus interest. They've been looking for him for 3 weeks. Patrick was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Malcolm, what would happen if these people discovered Trevor's current location? They'd collect their debt, one way or another. And if Trevor suddenly came into a large amount of cash, say, through a divorce settlement, would that solve his problems? Malcolm shook his head. These aren't the kind of people who forget being played for fools. Money might buy him time, but they'd want their pound of flesh too. Patrick smiled for the first time since discovering the affair. Then we need to make sure Trevor never gets the chance to run with any divorce settlement money. As Patrick and Malcolm planned Trevor's downfall, they had no idea that their conversation was being recorded. Amy Hardy, guilty about her betrayal but still loyal to her mother, had placed a listening device in Patrick's office days before his return from Oregon. Trevor had convinced her it was necessary to protect Chris from Patrick's potential violence. The recording would prove to be a critical mistake, not because it would save Trevor and Chris, but because it would give Patrick the final piece of evidence he needed to justify what was coming next. His own daughter had chosen to spy on him for his enemies. There would be no mercy, no forgiveness, and no second chances. The war for the Hardy family's soul was about to begin, and Patrick Hardy intended to be the only survivor. Chapter 5. Gathering Intelligence. Amy Hardy sat in her BMW outside a coffee shop in downtown Denver, her hands shaking as she replayed the recording she'd made of her father's conversation with Malcolm. Trevor had convinced her that Patrick might become violent when confronted with the affair, that recording his private conversations was necessary to protect her mother. But what she'd heard terrified her. Her father, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd attended every school play and soccer game, who'd patiently helped her with homework, had spoken about making Trevor disappear with the cold detachment of a stranger. The Patrick Hardy on that recording wasn't the devoted father she remembered, but something far more dangerous. Amy's first instinct was to warn Trevor and her mother immediately, but as she sat in her car, conflicted emotions warred within her. Despite everything, Patrick was still her father. The man on the recording might be capable of terrible things, but he was also the man who'd built an empire to provide for his family, who'd spent 2 weeks caring for a dying man he barely tolerated out of duty and love. For the first time since the affair began, Amy allowed herself to truly consider what they'd done to Patrick. She'd been so caught up in Trevor's manipulations and her mother's excitement that she'd never fully grasped the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just broken Patrick's heart. They'd systematically destroyed his entire world while he was caring for his dying father-in-law. But Amy's moment of moral clarity was interrupted by Trevor's arrival at the coffee shop. He slid into the passenger seat of her car, his usual charming smile immediately fading when he saw her expression. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost." Amy handed him the recording device with trembling fingers. "I think we're in trouble, Trevor. Real trouble." As Trevor listened to the recording, his face underwent a dramatic transformation. The confident predator who'd seduced mother and daughter alike was replaced by a man who understood that he'd seriously underestimated his opponent. Patrick Hardy wasn't the absent, workaholic husband Trevor had expected. He was a strategic thinker with dangerous resources and apparently no moral limitations when it came to protecting what was his. "This is bad," Trevor muttered, his mind racing through possible escape routes. "This is very bad. What are we going to do?" Amy asked, her voice small and frightened. Trevor's survival instincts kicked in immediately. His first thought was self-preservation, not protecting the family he'd helped destroy. "We need to accelerate our timeline. Your mother needs to file for divorce immediately, before your father can hide assets or worse." "Worse? Trevor, what does that mean?" Trevor looked at Amy, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a sophisticated co-conspirator, but a frightened teenager who was in way over her head. His manipulation of her had been so complete that she'd never considered the real-world consequences of her actions. Now reality was crashing down around all of them. "Amy, listen to me carefully. Your father is angrier than we anticipated. We need to be smart about this, move quickly, and most importantly, we need to stick together. Can you do that?" Amy nodded, though her faith in Trevor was beginning to crack. "Should we call the police? If Dad's planning to hurt you?" "No." Trevor's response was immediate and sharp. "We can't involve law enforcement. It would complicate everything." What he didn't tell Amy was that the last thing he needed was police attention given his outstanding warrants and visa issues. Meanwhile, at Hardy Foundation's headquarters, Patrick was orchestrating a masterpiece of strategic warfare. He'd assembled a team of specialists, private investigators, forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and attorneys, each sworn to absolute secrecy. To the outside world, Patrick appeared to be handling his father-in-law's death and dealing with family matters. In reality, he was building a case that would systematically destroy his enemies. His first target was Trevor's financial vulnerability. Patrick's investigators had located Trevor's creditors in Las Vegas. Specifically, a group led by a man named Vinny Torino, whose loan sharking operation was legendary for its efficiency and brutality. Patrick arranged a meeting through intermediaries, presenting himself as a concerned citizen with information about a fugitive debtor. The meeting took place in a private dining room, an upscale steakhouse. Vinny Torino was exactly what Patrick expected, a man who'd built his reputation on making problems disappear permanently. But Vinny was also a businessman who respected other successful men, especially those who approached him with profitable opportunities. "So you're telling me this Trevor Michaels is hiding out in Denver, playing house with some rich man's wife?" Vinny asked, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "I'm telling you that Trevor Garrison Michaels owes you a substantial sum of money and has been living under an assumed name while seducing wealthy women to fund his lifestyle. What you do with that information is entirely your business." "I need more time," Trevor pleaded, his charming facade cracking under the pressure. I'm in the middle of a business deal that will net me enough to pay you back with interest. A business deal, Vinny repeated slowly. You mean divorcing this woman and stealing half her husband's money? Trevor's shock at Vinny's detailed knowledge was evident. He'd assumed his activities in Denver were secret, but clearly, someone had provided very specific information about his situation. It's not stealing, Trevor protested weakly. Chris is entitled to her share of the marital assets. Vinny laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You're a real piece of work, Trevor. You seduce another man's wife, destroy his family, steal his money, and call a business deal. I almost admire the audacity. One of Vinny's men stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves in a way that suggested violence was imminent. But Vinny held up a hand, stopping him. Here's what's going to happen, Trevor. You're going to pay me what you owe, plus a penalty for making me chase you across 3 states. If this divorce settlement comes through, you'll give me everything you receive, and we'll call it even. If the settlement doesn't happen, or if you try to run again, my associates will express their disappointment in ways that will leave permanent reminders of your poor judgment. What if the settlement isn't enough to cover what I owe? Trevor asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you'll learn why people in my business don't default on their obligations, Vinny replied matter-of-factly. But I'm an optimist, Trevor. I believe this Patrick Hardy fellow is wealthy enough to cover your debts, assuming you can convince his wife to take him for everything he's worth. The message was clear. Trevor's survival depended entirely on the success of his scheme against Patrick. There was no escape route, no way to cut his losses and run. He was trapped between his criminal creditors and the man whose life he'd destroyed, with nowhere to go but forward. As Vinny's men released Trevor back into the Denver streets, he felt the full weight of his situation crushing down on him. Patrick Hardy wasn't just a cuckolded husband anymore. He was an existential threat whose mere existence stood between Trevor and a very painful death. Trevor returned to the Hardy mansion, shaken and desperate. Chris immediately noticed his agitation, the barely controlled fear in his eyes, the way he kept checking the windows and doors as if expecting an attack. What's wrong? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Trevor had always been vague about his past, deflecting questions with charm and misdirection. We need to accelerate everything, Trevor said, his usual confidence replaced by barely contained panic. The divorce, the settlement, all of it. We can't wait any longer. Trevor, you're scaring me. What happened? For the first time since their affair began, Trevor told Chris the complete truth about his situation. The failed businesses, the criminal associates, the $800,000 he owed to people who settled debts with violence. Chris listened in growing horror as she realized that the sophisticated man she'd fallen in love with was actually a con artist running from dangerous criminals. You used me, Chris said, the words barely above a whisper. This whole thing, our relationship, it was all about the money. No, Trevor protested, though his desperation made the denial unconvincing. I love you, Chris, but I also need you. We need each other. If we can get through this divorce quickly, we can pay off my debts and start fresh together. Chris felt the foundation of her new life crumbling just as surely as her marriage had. The passionate romance that had justified destroying her family was revealed to be a calculated deception. But she was too deep into the betrayal to turn back now. Patrick would never forgive her, and her only hope for any kind of future was to see the divorce through and hope Trevor's love was at least partially genuine. How much do you owe? She asked quietly. With interest and penalties? Almost $1 million. Chris closed her eyes, calculating their chances. Patrick's net worth was substantial, but Colorado was not a community property state. Her settlement would depend on the judge's discretion and the skill of her attorney. $1 million was achievable, but it would require taking Patrick for everything she could get. We'll need the best divorce attorney in the state, she said finally, and we'll need to move fast before Patrick can hide assets. What neither Chris nor Trevor realized was that their conversation was being recorded by the same surveillance system Trevor had convinced Amy to help disable weeks earlier. Patrick had never actually shut down the security system. He'd simply made it appear offline while continuing to monitor his home remotely. From his hotel room, Patrick watched his wife and her lover plan his financial destruction with the same detached interest he might observe a competitor's boardroom strategy. Their desperation was palpable, their fear was growing, and their options were narrowing exactly as he'd planned. The first phase of Patrick's revenge was complete. Trevor was trapped between criminal creditors and an impossible timeline, while Chris was finally beginning to understand the true nature of the man she'd chosen over her husband. But this was only the beginning. Patrick's phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. Package delivered. Target received message. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2. Patrick smiled coldly as he typed his response. Proceed as planned. No mercy. The war for Patrick Hardy's soul was entering its most brutal phase, and his enemies were about to learn that the man they betrayed was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Amy Hardy paced frantically around her bedroom, her phone pressed to her ear as she left her fourth voicemail for her father. Trevor's revelation about his criminal debts and the violent men hunting him had shattered her last illusions about the affair. What she thought was a romantic rebellion against her father's authority was actually a criminal conspiracy that could destroy their entire family. Dad, please call me back, she whispered into the phone. I know you hate me right now, but we need to talk. There are things you don't know about Trevor, dangerous things. Please, I'm scared. But Patrick wasn't taking Amy's calls. He was 3 blocks away from his own home, sitting in Malcolm's surveillance van, watching his daughter's breakdown through hidden cameras while feeling absolutely nothing. The caring father who might have rushed to comfort his frightened child was gone, replaced by a strategist who viewed Amy's panic as confirmation that his plan was working perfectly. She's finally starting to understand, Malcolm observed, watching Amy through the monitors. The kid's scared out of her mind. She should be, Patrick replied coldly. She made her choice when she decided to spy on me for my enemies. Actions have consequences. Malcolm had known Patrick for 8 years, but he'd never seen this version of the man. Calculating, ruthless, completely devoid of the warmth that had once made him such an effective leader. Boss, she's still your daughter. Patrick's expression didn't change. No, my daughter died the moment she chose to betray me for Trevor Garrison. The girl in that house is just another enemy who happens to share my DNA. Vinny smiled, the expression somehow managing to be both charming and terrifying. You know, Mr. Hardy, I like you. You're a man who understands that certain problems require certain solutions. This Trevor has cost me money and respect. Both are commodities I value highly. I'm sure you'll handle the situation appropriately, Patrick said, sliding a folder across the table. That contains Trevor's current address, daily routine, and the locations where he's most vulnerable to approach. And what do you want in return for this information? I want Trevor Garrison to realize that Denver is no longer a safe place for him to conduct business. I want him to understand that his current lifestyle is unsustainable. How you convey that message is entirely up to you. Vinny studied Patrick with newfound respect. You're not asking me to kill him. I'm asking you to collect what you're owed and ensure he understands the consequences of his choices. If Trevor chooses to leave Denver permanently to avoid further complications, that would be an unfortunate but understandable decision on his part. As Patrick drove back to his hotel, he felt a cold satisfaction. Trevor's past was about to catch up with him in the most violent way possible. It would appear to be simple criminal justice rather than Patrick's orchestrated revenge. By the time Vinny's people finished with Trevor, the man would be begging to leave Colorado, assuming he was still capable of begging. But Patrick's plans extended far beyond Trevor. He discovered that Chris had been sharing confidential information about his business deals, potentially costing him millions in competitive advantages. She'd also attempted to access trust funds established for Amy's education, money that was legally protected but vulnerable to someone with inside knowledge of account numbers and passwords. Most damaging of all, Patrick had uncovered evidence that Chris and Trevor had been planning their escape for months. They'd opened joint accounts in the Cayman Islands, researched states with favorable divorce laws, and even consulted with attorneys about maximizing Chris's settlement while minimizing her tax obligations. This wasn't a passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a calculated theft disguised as romance. The final piece of Patrick's intelligence gathering came from an unexpected source. The housekeeper, Maria, whom Chris had dismissed. Maria had worked for the Hardy family for 12 years and had witnessed the affair's development firsthand. More importantly, she kept detailed records of the household's activities, including photographs and videos she'd taken to document valuable items for insurance purposes. Mr. Patrick, Maria said during their private meeting, tears streaming down her face. I tried to tell you, but Mrs. Chris, she made me promise to stay quiet. She said you knew about Mr. Trevor, that it was arrangement you approved. The photographs Maria provided were devastating evidence of the affair's duration and scope. They showed Trevor living in the Hardy mansion as early as 3 months ago, long before Patrick had left for Oregon. They documented Amy's participation in the deception, including images of her covering security cameras and disposing of evidence that might reveal Trevor's presence. But the most damaging evidence came from security footage Maria had secretly downloaded before being dismissed. The videos showed Chris and Trevor in Patrick's home office, accessing his computer, photographing documents, and even discussing specific business deals they planned to exploit. They thought I was just cleaning lady who didn't understand English very well, Maria explained. But I heard everything. They planned to take everything from you, Mr. Patrick. Your wife, she said you deserved to lose everything because you never appreciated what you had. As Patrick reviewed the evidence, he felt his transformation complete itself. The loving husband and father was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Chris, Trevor, and Amy had declared war on him, and now they would learn why Patrick Hardy had never lost a fight that mattered. The first phase of his revenge was about to begin, and none of his enemies had any idea what was coming for them. Chapter 6. The First Strike. Vincent Torino's men found Trevor Garrison at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, just as he was leaving the Hardy mansion for his usual run through the affluent Cherrywood neighborhood. The encounter was swift, professional, and absolutely terrifying for Trevor, who found himself surrounded by 3 very large, very serious men who knew exactly who he was and why they were there. Trevor Garrison Michaels, the lead man, said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Mr. Torino would like a word. Trevor's blood turned to ice. He'd been running from Vinny's people for months, constantly looking over his shoulder, but the wealthy Denver suburb had felt like sanctuary. The realization that his past had caught up with him in the place he felt safest was psychologically devastating. I don't know what you're talking about. Trevor tried to bluff, but his voice betrayed his terror. $873,000, plus interest, the man continued calmly. That's what you owe for the gym equipment and startup capital you borrowed 6 months ago. Mr. Torino has been very patient, but patience has its limits. The men escorted Trevor to a black SUV parked 3 blocks away, far enough from the Hardy mansion to avoid witnesses, but close enough to drive home the point that nowhere was safe. The 20-minute ride to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Denver was conducted in absolute silence, giving Trevor plenty of time to contemplate his rapidly deteriorating situation. Vinny Torino was waiting in the warehouse, surrounded by exercise equipment that looked suspiciously similar to what Trevor had promised to purchase with the borrowed money. The irony wasn't lost on either man. "Trevor, my friend," Vinny said, his tone conversational, but his eyes cold as winter. "I've been looking for you. Imagine my surprise when I learned you've been living in luxury with some rich man's wife instead of building the fitness empire you promised me." Trevor tried to maintain his composure, falling back on the charm that had served him so well with wealthy women. "Vinny, I can explain. The Denver market required more research than anticipated, but I'm close to securing the financing we discussed." Vinny's backhand across Trevor's face was swift and practiced, cutting off the explanation mid-sentence. "Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. I know exactly what you've been doing, where you've been living, and who you've been fucking. The question is, how are you going to pay me back?" Inside the mansion, Chris was experiencing her own crisis of faith. Trevor's criminal history and the very real threat of violence had forced her to confront the reality of what she'd done. She destroyed a 20-year marriage for a man who'd seduced her as part of a financial scheme. The sophisticated romance she'd thought she was living was actually a trashy con game, and she was just another mark. But Chris's survival instincts were stronger than her guilt. She'd burned every bridge with Patrick, and retreat was impossible. Her only option was to push forward with the divorce and hope she could extract enough money to satisfy Trevor's debts and secure some kind of future for herself. She'd already contacted Denver's most aggressive divorce attorney, Harrison Blackstone, known for his ability to extract maximum settlements from wealthy husbands. Blackstone had reviewed her case and expressed confidence that she could walk away with at least 40% of Patrick's assets, possibly more if they could prove emotional abandonment or other forms of marital misconduct. The key is moving fast, Blackstone had advised during their consultation. If your husband is as smart as you say, he's already taking steps to protect his assets. We need to file before he can hide everything in offshore accounts or business structures. What Chris didn't know was that Harrison Blackstone was one of Patrick's oldest friends, having served as legal counsel for Hardy Foundation since its early days. The attorney had called Patrick immediately after Chris's consultation, providing detailed information about her strategy and timeline. She wants to file tomorrow, Blackstone had reported, claiming irreconcilable differences and seeking 50-50 asset division plus spousal support. She's also requesting immediate possession of the marital home. Perfect, Patrick had replied. File whatever paperwork she wants. Give her exactly what she's asking for. Blackstone was confused by Patrick's response. You want me to roll over? Patrick, she could take you for millions. Harrison, trust me on this. File the papers, begin discovery. Do everything exactly as if you were representing her interests instead of mine. But make sure every document, every financial disclosure, every piece of evidence she provides goes through you first. Now, as Trevor frantically made phone calls trying to negotiate an extension with Vinnie Torino's people, and Chris prepared to destroy her marriage legally, Patrick was implementing the most brilliant aspect of his revenge plan. He was going to give them exactly what they wanted, and it would destroy them completely. The divorce papers were filed on Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Chris had temporary possession of the mansion. Trevor was breathing easier, believing his financial salvation was at hand, and Amy was cautiously optimistic that maybe the family could survive this crisis after all. None of them realized they were walking into the most sophisticated trap Patrick had ever constructed. The first sign of trouble came when Chris tried to access the family's primary bank accounts. Despite the divorce filing, she discovered that she no longer had access to most of their liquid assets. Patrick had moved the money, but legally, transferring funds to accounts that predated their marriage, business accounts protected by corporate structures, and investment vehicles that were technically separate from marital assets. He can't do this, Chris protested to Blackstone during an emergency meeting. We had joint accounts. I should have access. He moved the money before the filing. Blackstone explained, his expression grave. Technically, he hasn't violated any court orders because the accounts he transferred from weren't specifically protected by the temporary restraining order. So I'm broke. Not broke, but cash poor until we can force disclosure of his hidden assets. That could take months. Trevor's panic reached new heights when Chris explained their cash flow problem. Vinny's people had given him 2 weeks to produce a substantial payment, and now his only source of funds was tied up in legal proceedings that could drag on indefinitely. We need to liquidate something, Trevor insisted. Jewelry, art, something valuable we can sell quickly. But when they attempted to access Chris's jewelry collection, they discovered that most of the valuable pieces were missing. The insurance company informed them that Patrick had moved the items to a secure facility before leaving for Oregon, citing security concerns while he was away. Technically legal, completely devastating to their immediate financial needs. Amy, meanwhile, was discovering that her trust fund, money set aside for her college education, was no longer accessible. Patrick had restructured the account before leaving for Oregon, changing the terms so that distributions required both parent signatures. With the divorce proceedings ongoing, any access to Amy's education money was effectively frozen. I can't pay for college now, Amy realized, the full scope of her father's revenge beginning to dawn on her. He's cutting me off completely. The psychological pressure was taking its toll on all three conspirators. Trevor was jumping at shadows, expecting Vinny's men to appear at any moment. Chris was discovering that 20 years of marriage to a financial genius meant that extracting money from him would be infinitely more complex than she'd anticipated. Amy was facing the possibility that her betrayal would cost her not just her relationship with her father, but her entire future. But Patrick's masterstroke was still to come. On Friday evening, Harrison Blackstone called with devastating news. "Chris, we have a problem. Patrick's filing a countersuit." "For what?" "Fraud, embezzlement, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy to defraud. He's claiming that you and Trevor conspired to steal business information and that you've been transferring marital assets to hidden accounts." Chris felt her world tilt off its axis. "That's not true. We never. We looked at some documents, but Chris, they have evidence. Financial records, video surveillance, recorded conversations. They're not just seeking to deny you a settlement. They're claiming you owe him money for damages to his business." The trap was complete. Instead of walking away with millions from the divorce, Chris was facing the possibility of criminal charges and financial ruin. Trevor's desperation reached a breaking point as he realized that not only would there be no divorce settlement to pay his debts, but that his association with Chris had potentially made him an accessory to crimes he didn't even know he'd committed. Amy, listening to her mother's frantic phone conversation with the attorney, finally understood that her father hadn't just been angry about the affair. He'd been systematically documenting their betrayal and building a case that would destroy them all. In his hotel room, Patrick watched the chaos unfold through his surveillance network with cold satisfaction. His enemies had wanted to destroy his life and steal his fortune. Instead, they'd walked directly into a trap that would leave them facing criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and the very real possibility of violence from Trevor's criminal associates. The war was almost over, and Patrick Hardy had won before his enemies even realized they were fighting. Chapter 8. The Destruction. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Vincent Torino himself arrived at the Hardy mansion. Unlike his previous visits through intermediaries, this was personal. Trevor's 2-week extension had expired, and no payment had materialized. Worse, word had reached Vinny that Trevor's primary asset, his access to Patrick Hardy's money, was evaporating in a storm of legal complications. Chris answered the door to find a man who radiated controlled violence despite his expensive suit and polite demeanor. Behind him stood 2 associates who looked like they'd stepped out of a nightmare. "Mrs. Hardy," Vinny said with dangerous courtesy. "I'm Vincent Torino. I believe you know why I'm here." The mention of Vinny's name drained the color from Chris's face. Trevor had described these people in terms that left no doubt about their capacity for violence. Seeing them at her door, her formerly secure sanctuary, was a psychological shock that shattered her remaining composure. "Trevor isn't here," she said, her voice barely steady. "Oh, but I think he is," Vinny replied, stepping uninvited into the foyer. "Trevor has a habit of hiding behind the women he seduces. It's become something of a pattern with him." Trevor appeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. The confident predator who destroyed the Hardy family was gone, replaced by a terrified man who understood that his time had run out. "Vinny," Trevor said, descending the stairs with forced calm. "I told your people I needed until the end of the month." "You've had 6 months, Trevor. End of the month, end of the week, end of the conversation, it doesn't matter. The time for extensions is over." Amy emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the voices, and froze when she saw the visitors. Even at 18, she possessed enough survival instinct to recognize predators when she encountered them. "Who are these people?" she whispered to her mother. "Business associates of Trevor's," Chris replied, though her voice betrayed her terror. Vinny smiled at the exchange, enjoying the family's growing fear. "Business associates. I like that. It's much more polite than the people Trevor stole money from." "I didn't steal anything," Trevor protested weakly. "The investment didn't work out as planned, but—" Vinny's backhand sent Trevor stumbling backward into the living room. The violence was swift, casual, and absolutely shocking to Chris and Amy, who'd never witnessed anything like it in their sheltered lives. "Don't lie to me in front of your girlfriend and her daughter," Vinny said calmly, straightening his jacket. "We both know you never intended to build any gyms. You took my money to fund your lifestyle and your pursuit of married women. The only question now is how you're going to pay it back." Trevor struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip. "The divorce settlement." "What divorce settlement?" Vinny interrupted. "My sources tell me you're not getting any money from this divorce. In fact, they tell me you might be facing criminal charges for fraud. Is that true, Mrs. Hardy?" Chris found herself unable to speak, nodding mutely as the full scope of their situation became clear. They weren't just facing financial ruin. They were trapped between Patrick's legal revenge and Trevor's criminal obligations. "Interesting," Vinny continued. "So Trevor has convinced you to destroy your marriage for nothing, and now he can't pay his debts. That creates a problem for everyone involved." Amy, displaying more courage than anyone expected, stepped forward. "How much money are we talking about?" Vinny studied the teenager with newfound interest. "Almost $1 million, plus interest and penalties. Your boyfriend here has expensive tastes." "He's not my boyfriend," Amy said, disgust evident in her voice. "He's my mother's mistake." The comment drew a sharp look from Chris, but Amy was past caring about her mother's feelings. The romantic rebellion that had justified her betrayal of Patrick was revealed to be a sordid criminal enterprise, and she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what they'd lost. "Smart girl," Vinny said approvingly. "Unlike her mother, she can recognize a con man when she sees one." "What do you want from us?" Chris asked, finding her voice. "I want my money. Since Trevor can't provide it, and you apparently can't provide it, we need to explore alternative arrangements." The threat was unmistakable. Vinny's people didn't just break legs. They took possession of valuable assets, including people, until debts were satisfied. "There has to be something we can do," Trevor pleaded. "Some arrangement." "There is," Vinny replied, "but you're not going to like it." At that moment, Patrick's voice cut through the tension from the foyer. "Actually, there might be a solution that works for everyone." All eyes turned to see Patrick Hardy standing in the doorway of his own home, looking like a man who'd just returned from a pleasant vacation rather than someone whose family had been systematically destroyed. Vinny's expression shifted to one of professional interest. This was the man whose money Trevor had promised, the husband whose life had been destroyed by the affair. But instead of rage or desperation, Patrick radiated the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards. "Mr. Hardy," Vinny said carefully, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "It's my house," Patrick replied simply. "And you're Vincent Torino. Your reputation precedes you." The acknowledgement of Vinny's identity sent a chill through the room. Patrick wasn't just aware of Trevor's criminal connections. He'd researched them thoroughly. "I understand Trevor owes you a substantial sum," Patrick continued, walking into his own living room as if Vinny's armed associates weren't present. "I also understand that recent developments have compromised his ability to pay." "That's correct," Vinny replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. Patrick looked at his wife, his daughter, and the man who destroyed his family. His expression remained completely neutral, showing neither anger nor forgiveness, just cold calculation. "I have a proposition," Patrick said finally. "One that solves everyone's problems." Chris felt a surge of hope. Perhaps Patrick was offering to pay Trevor's debts to protect his family, choosing reconciliation over revenge. She was about to learn how completely she'd misunderstood the man she'd been married to for 20 years. "I'm listening," Vinny said. Patrick smiled, the expression somehow more terrifying than Vinny's threats had been. "Trevor Garrison owes you almost $1 million. My wife and her lover have been planning to steal that money from me through their divorce settlement. But what if I told you there was a way to collect your debt while ensuring that Trevor never bothers another family again?" The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of Patrick's words. He wasn't offering salvation. He was negotiating the terms of their destruction. Amy was the first to understand. "Dad, no. Whatever you're thinking." "Amy," Patrick said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You lost the right to call me Dad when you chose to betray me for this man. You're not my daughter anymore. You're just another person who made the wrong choice." The words hit Amy like physical blows, but Patrick's attention had already shifted back to Vinny. "I'm interested in your proposition," Vinny said carefully. Patrick's smile grew wider and colder. "Excellent, because I think you're going to like what I have in mind." The final phase of Patrick Hardy's revenge was about to begin, and his enemies were going to discover that sometimes the most dangerous place to be is between a man and his justice. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. After 2 weeks of caring for my father-in-law, I came home to find the door unlocked. Inside, my daughter lay covered in blood. Barely breathing, she screamed, "Run now." "Why?" I asked when footsteps approached from behind. I turned around and saw. Patrick paused, looking directly at Vincent Torino, exactly what I expected to see. The confusion on everyone's faces was palpable. Patrick's words seemed disconnected from reality. Amy wasn't covered in blood, she wasn't barely breathing, and the scene he described bore no resemblance to the current situation. "I'm sorry," Vinny said carefully, "but I think there's been some misunderstanding." Patrick's smile was arctic. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Torino. I'm simply describing what this scene will look like when the police arrive in approximately 15 minutes. The words hit the room like a physical force. Trevor went pale, Chris stumbled backward, and Amy's eyes widened in terror as she began to understand the scope of her father's final gambit. "You see," Patrick continued conversationally, "when I learned about my family's betrayal, I had to decide between forgiveness and justice. My wife chose to destroy our marriage for a con man. My daughter chose to spy on me for my enemies. And Trevor chose to steal from dangerous people and hide behind my family when his crimes caught up with him." Vinny's associates shifted nervously, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but Vinny held up a restraining hand. This conversation had taken an unexpected turn, and he wanted to understand where it was heading. "Chris," Patrick said, addressing his wife directly for the first time, "you wanted excitement, passion, a life free from the boring constraints of marriage to a workaholic. How does it feel now that you're about to get exactly what you wish for?" "Patrick, please," Chris whispered, genuine terror replacing her earlier defiance. "We can fix this. We can work it out." "Fix it?" Patrick's laugh was devoid of humor. "You systematically destroyed 20 years of marriage, stole business secrets, corrupted our daughter, and conspired with a criminal to rob me blind. What exactly do you think we're going to fix?" Amy found her voice, desperation making her brave. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. You can't just—" "I can't what?" Patrick interrupted. "I can't treat you like the enemy you chose to become. I can't hold you accountable for betraying the man who loved you more than his own life." Patrick turned to face Amy fully, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step backward. This wasn't anger or disappointment. It was the complete absence of love, as if she'd become a stranger to him. "Amy, you recorded my private conversations and shared them with the man who was destroying our family. You helped plan my financial ruin while I was caring for your dying grandfather. You celebrated my betrayal and called it justice. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" Trevor, sensing the conversation spiraling towards something catastrophic, tried to assert himself. "Patrick, let's all calm down and—" "Trevor," Patrick said without looking at him, "in about 10 minutes, you're going to be dead." The matter-of-fact statement froze everyone in place. Patrick wasn't threatening Trevor. He was stating a simple fact, as if discussing the weather. Vinny found his voice. "Mr. Hardy, I think we should clarify what's happening here." Patrick finally looked at Vinny directly. "What's happening, Mr. Torino, is that you're about to collect your debt in full, and I'm about to solve all my problems simultaneously." Patrick pulled out his phone and began playing an audio recording. Trevor's voice filled the room, discussing his plan to seduce Chris, steal Patrick's money, and disappear with his new fortune. But the recording had been edited, spliced together from multiple conversations to create a narrative where Trevor explicitly threatened to kill Patrick if the divorce settlement didn't come through. "That's not what I said," Trevor protested frantically. "That's been edited." "Has it?" Patrick asked mildly. I'm sure the police will be very thorough in their investigation. Of course, by the time they sort out the truth, you'll already be dead, so it won't matter much to you. The pieces of Patrick's plan were coming together with terrifying clarity. He'd manipulated everyone, Vinny, Chris, Amy, even Trevor, into positions where his final revenge would appear to be simple criminal justice. You called them, Vinny said, understanding dawning. You called the police. I called them 20 minutes ago, Patrick confirmed. I reported that my wife's criminal lover had threatened my family and was holding us hostage. I mentioned that he was connected to organized crime figures from Las Vegas who were also at my home, armed and dangerous. Vinny's professional calm cracked for the first time. You son of a bitch. You're setting us up. I'm not setting anyone up, Patrick replied. I'm simply allowing the natural consequences of everyone's choices to play out. Trevor chose to steal from you and hide behind my family. You chose to come to my home with armed men to collect your debt. Chris chose to betray our marriage. Amy chose to betray our family. I'm just facilitating the resolution. Amy was hyperventilating now, understanding that her father intended for all of them to suffer the consequences of their choices while he emerged as the innocent victim. The blood, she gasped. You said I'd be covered in blood. Patrick's expression didn't change. Mr. Torino's associates are armed and dangerous. When the police arrive to find a hostage situation, there will unfortunately be violence. Crossfire is unpredictable, Amy. Innocent people sometimes get hurt. You're insane, Chris whispered. You're willing to see your own daughter killed for revenge? My daughter died when she chose Trevor over me, Patrick replied. The girl standing here is just someone who looks like her. The sound of sirens in the distance galvanized everyone into action. Vinny's men drew their weapons. Trevor began frantically searching for an escape route, and Chris grabbed Amy's arm, pulling her toward the back of the house. There's nowhere to run, Patrick said calmly. I've made sure of that. Indeed, Patrick's planning had been meticulous. He'd disabled the mansion's back exits, blocked the garage door, and even cut the phone lines to prevent anyone from contradicting his story to the police. His enemies were trapped in a scenario where any outcome would destroy them. Vinny, realizing the scope of the trap, made the only logical choice available to him. This is over, he told his men. We're leaving. Now. But Patrick shook his head. Mr. Torino, I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, I've already told the police that you're holding my family hostage. If you leave now, you'll be fugitives from a federal kidnapping charge. If you stay, well, Patrick shrugged eloquently. The sirens were getting closer, and everyone in the room understood that the police would arrive to find exactly what Patrick had described, a domestic situation involving organized crime figures, a missing $1 million, and a family in crisis. Trevor made one last desperate play. Patrick, if you let me go, I'll disappear forever. You'll never see me again. Patrick looked at the man who destroyed his family with such complete contempt that Trevor actually stepped backward. Trevor, there's nowhere on earth you could go that would be far enough away from me. I have resources you can't imagine and patience you can't fathom. Your death today is actually mercy compared to what I was planning for you. Amy broke free from her mother and threw herself at Patrick's feet, sobbing hysterically. Please, Daddy, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll testify against them, Patrick looked down at his daughter, his former daughter, with eyes as cold as winter stone. Amy, you made your choice when you had the chance to be loyal. You chose Trevor. Now live with the consequences. The first police car pulled into the driveway as Patrick calmly walked to his front door. In 60 seconds, he would transform from the architect of destruction into the traumatized victim of a home invasion. His enemies would be left to explain their presence in his home, their criminal connections, and their conspiracy against him to law enforcement officers who'd already been briefed on Patrick's version of events. Chris, Trevor, Amy, and Vinny all understood simultaneously that Patrick Hardy had orchestrated the perfect revenge. He would emerge from this situation as the grieving husband, betrayed father, and innocent victim. They would face criminal charges, violent retribution, and very possibly death. As Patrick opened the door to